Hello guys, today we will be talking about what if Naruto and Hinata were silent prodigies part 7. If you enjoy this video please like and subscribe. Now let begin. The instant Takemi declared her hostile intentions, she sucked down the rest of the unfiltered cigarette between her lips, then lurched forward, spewing forth a hail of burning ash. Hinata shoved Naruto the opposite of her direction in mid-stride, narrowly avoiding the choking burning fumes. She readied a pair of exploding stakes and took aim the instant she was out of harm's way, but stopped upon the realization that the foul-mouthed woman was no longer there. Hey! Curse called from his position, almost totally blind from the lack of ample light, whereas she focused her Byakugan and quickly located the female enemy, running away? That doesn't sound good, the Uzumaki thought, unsealing his favorite ninjato in preparation. Well, let's go get her. You can see silence added in a tone that screamed, you idiot. The blonde held his tongue and reeled back, collecting chakra in his chest. He then lurched forward, and a heavy stream of flames that coated the walls erupted from his mouth. Now, he stated with emphasis, let's go. His ally nodded, and the Konoha duo took off as swiftly as they could. As they pursued Takemi, they noticed a light at the end of the chamber. The illumination cast from the apparent opening wasn't nearly enough to affect the enormous alcohol-choked room, but it was there nonetheless. The Hyuga pushed her bloodline further to see ahead, but her superior vision was blocked by the solid stone surfaces. All she could see was through the fixed doorway, some kind of room that looked extremely familiar. Meanwhile, Naruto strained his hidden azure eyes to gaze at the foreign threat. Despite the dim light behind him and the bright opening ahead casting the woman into silhouette, he got a somewhat clear view of her back. Her long unruly crimson-haired instant twirled in the wind, partially revealing the object strapped to her back. The undercover prodigy squinted to make out the device, taking several long seconds to determine why it appeared so familiar. It suddenly hit him. A long time ago he borrowed several books from the Konoha Public Library, one of which was a documentation on foreign cultures. One segment of this light reading covered music. Apparently, in the far north, there was a form of musical entertainment coined rock and roll by the local inhabitants, and one of the main instruments used in these performances was referred to as an electric guitar. The blonde matched the basic shape of the numerous photos he had seen with the object attached to Takemi, but hers appeared much bulkier. An eternity of a minute passed, and the opponent reached the opening and leapt upwards out of sight. The intelligent genin approached the open doorway cautiously yet swiftly, knowing full well that they could be walking straight into a trap. With little hesitation, they charged through onto the waiting bridge, and gasped. It was yet another massive cylindrical chamber similar to the hub in design, with numerous stone walkways stretching across the deep pit, and a handful of unceremonious granite pillars that spanned the length from top to bottom. But there was one major difference between the hub and this vertical room. The wires. All those wires, out into the open air, every inch was laid against a stone surface. Hinata was jerked from her amazement when her pale bloodline eyes noticed a cavalcade of wires flinging across the opening she and Curse had just stepped through. Since she had no idea if this was an attack, a diversion, or merely a method to seal them in, she grabbed Naruto's arm and pulled hard as she leapt off their current bridge onto the landing below. They touched down, and she released the boy who suddenly grasped her in a tight embrace and flung them even deeper. For the second time in 3 seconds, the geniuses landed on another precipice. The blonde immediately let go of his partner, unsealed his dual broadswords, and swiveled on his heel. His gut told him that something was very, very wrong. Sadly for him, he was right. Takemi, her metal-covered boots slamming hard into the granite 30 feet away from the geniuses, swung the instrument from her back and jammed her arm down in a harsh motion. As if on cue, the room rumbled with a deep note, and a gush of wind shoved the budding prodigies back a few feet. The foul-mouthed woman closed her amber eyes and, adopting a look that was decidedly serene, began playing a tune of distorted brutality that echoed mightily off the walls and vibrated through the wires with unmatched intensity. Uzumaki instantly recognized the telltale signs of chakra slicing through the air towards him and his ally. That's wind element. He pumped his own chakra into the dual blades in his hands and began an elaborate dance, barely combating the horizontal pendulums of air that spiraled his way. Every cut he made against the endless attacks merely bisected them, knocking them slightly off course as they split into. The Hyuga easily saw what her ally was trying to do and grimaced. She had never been real handy with wind-based techniques. In fact, she was currently at a loss on how to combat Takemi's efforts to kill them. The gears turned in her mind, and she came to the sad conclusion that the only thing she could really do was stay put behind Curse. The fellow genius was able to partially divert the lethal winds and took the injuries inflicted upon him stoically. Seconds ticked by endlessly. The cavern of granite and wires vibrated with the tunes of celebrated violence emanating from the foul-mouthed woman's deep crimson guitar, and the spiraling blades of air arsed from the modified musical instrument, with every harsh strum of the chords. The so-called music pulsing through the massive chamber was exhilarating. It only added to Naruto's adrenaline, as he desperately moved to counter the lethal winds. Takemi's amber eyes opened, as if she were struck with the realization that she was being distracted from the task at hand, and, transitioning flawlessly, leapt high into the air, and balanced herself on the edge of the bridge above the geniuses. Letting loose an energized smirk, she suddenly changed the tune. The granite wall shivered as new commands pulsed through the wires, and the outcropping beneath the budding geniuses began to shake violently. What's going on? Curse shouted, glancing back and forth rapidly. Hinata's pale eyes already knew the answer. It's those wires, she returned. They're cutting into the bridge. Without further ado, the Konoha duo jumped from the doomed precipice onto another below, putting distance between them and their crimson-haired enemy. Moments later, the metal strands at the ends of the bridge compressed fully, and the ensuing strain cracked the stone like it was dried pudding. The walkway tumbled into the pit, disrupting the Prodigies' footing a bit as it smashed into their suspended landing, before continuing its descent into the darkness below. So distance is a bad thing, the blonde stated matter-of-factly. We gotta get close to her. Let's go. The undercover geniuses began running up the wire-bound wall, intent on catching up with Takemi as quickly as possible, while ignoring the rumbling steel beneath their feet. Silence frowned for a moment and focused her Byakugan to find the foul-mouthed woman perilously perched at the edge of the highest bridge in the vertical chamber. That can be good. As soon as the blue-haired girl thought that, the tune changed again, and the wires lining the oversized cylinder rattled dangerously. Naruto instinctively felt danger and grabbed his ally's arm before leaping off the wall. The next instant, a sickle of sharpened air surfed outwards from their previous position and missed their legs by a centimeter. They landed on a nearby bridge, away from the majority of the wires. Then the stone walkway started shaking violently. It was also going down along with 4 other suspensions above it. The Uzumaki swore under his breath and, knowing that he couldn't maneuver properly with his fellow genius in tow, released her arm. Hinata understood the motion and spun off the doom walkway onto the cylindrical wall, braced herself as she heard a change in tune, then launched herself back into the air, narrowly avoiding another massive blade of air protruding from the endless bale. Her superior vision noted that her partner was imitating her motions, weaving back and forth between falling bridges while slowly working his way up. She continued on this maddeningly repetitious pattern until she noted yet another change in tune. The vertical cavern vibrated like never before, and untold thousands of lethal blades of air arsed from the metal strands, slicing through the stone bridges like an axe through plywood. Her surprised mind told her to take cover. The former outcroppings would absorb some of the damage, while she, miracles aside, might be able to counter the remaining attacks with her family's patented style. Unfortunately, she panicked when she noticed the curse was unable to properly defend himself, and took a huge dose of razor-sharp air to his body, spattering blood everywhere. The Hyuga instinctively moved to maneuver herself in midair to the boy's side, but in doing so, she neglected her own safety, which merited the same fate for her. She felt 1,000 needles stab into her as the blades of wind sliced into her soft flesh and flung her bodily fluids into wide arcs. She gagged, trying not to cough up blood into her mask as she stumbled behind a section of falling rock and cemented herself in place with chakra. Her body went into autopilot as the effects of blood loss set in, and her breathing went heavy as her now automated mind instructed her to reach for her pack. She needed her specialized soldier and blood pills. Naruto was having a similar ordeal. The fox's chakra would kick in and begin healing his severe wounds, only to be rendered useless as more sides of wind cut through him. He actually blacked out for a second during the immense pain, and, upon awakening, found the ground at the bottom of the darkened pit to be much closer. Oh shit, his weary mind thought. Wait, where's silence? His head shot in every direction looking for his temporary ally, eventually locating her several meters away. The blonde moved in closer to find the girl in bad shape. Noting that the wreckage-strewn floor was approaching rather rapidly, he wrapped his bloodied arms around Silence and positioned himself to hit bottom. His feet touched the uneven granite with a sickening crunch, and he immediately knew that something broke. He pushed that problem to the side and attended to his semi-conscious partner. Hinata was absent-mindedly searching for the necessary pills to replenish her blood and stamina, failing miserably. Her once smooth azure mask now possessed a huge gash across the mouth, revealing cracked and bleeding lips, while the rest of her uniform was in tatters, teetering at the edge of obscenity seeing as how it barely covered her unmentionables. What was visible of her pale skin was, more often than not, sliced to pieces. Some of the wounds were near fatal, and the fact that she was still conscious was nothing short of an act of God. Curse wasn't much better. His camouflage jacket had been torn completely to shreds, and his crimson mask also sported gaping cuts. He was also cut up pretty bad. He held his side, totally convinced that, if he let go, an organ or two would spill out. But he wasn't too concerned with his dire injuries. He had a bastard fox who worked at his beck and call during such moments. He dipped into a large chunk of the nine-tailed demon's chakra, and his horrific wounds immediately began to smoke shut, albeit at an agonizingly slow rate. Attempting to ignore the searing pain, he liberated Silence from her task and began rummaging through her pack, finding what looked to be some standard blood pills. He gently pried the girl's bloodied lips open with 2 fingers and slipped the plasma-restoring medicine into her mouth. She began chewing, and he nodded satisfactorily. As the substance prompted the genius girl's system to produce more blood, active thinking returned to her mind, and she tried to sit up before her body argued. In far too much pain to move, she resigned herself to simply lying there. Her bloodline snapped off, and she sighed heavily, wincing at the action almost immediately. "You gonna live?" the blonde inquired quietly. The bottom of the pit was pretty dark, and he didn't want to openly inform Takemi that they were still alive. She coughed lightly, spitting up blood while she was at it. "I think so. Anything else in here?" He held her pack up. "Soldier pills," she replied, too weak to go into any further detail. A few seconds passed while Naruto fished through Hinata's bag. He pulled out a plastic tube, popped it open, and glanced into it. Satisfied that he found what he was looking for, he poured a few pills into his palm and fed them to his prone ally. The Hyuga swallowed them and waited for the medicine to take effect before moving her shaky arms to her abdomen and beginning to heal her injuries. "Chakra? Is that all you needed?" the Uzumaki stated with a hint of playfulness in his voice, then moved his hands over hers, channeling some of the fox's energy into her healing techniques. Silence didn't argue. She was dangerously low on the natural energy. She gladly accepted the kind gesture and worked on restoring the worst of her wounds. Afterwards, she planned on fixing up her partner when the boy spoke up. "You still got injuries left," he said. "Heal those first." "What?" she questioned him, her dazed state of mind not noticing the tiny wisps of smoke oozing from Curse's wounds as they slowly closed themselves. No, you got some real bad." "No." He placed a hand against her chest to prevent her from rising. "You first." "I can take it, but trust me," he smiled, "I can handle this." Hinata couldn't believe her rival's self-sacrifice. Furthermore, how could anyone be as hurt as him and still have the energy to be up and about? Now's not the time to think about that, she knew. Gotta concentrate on the task at hand. She continued her own self-treatment. Takemi stood atop the highest bridge in the wire-bound chamber, gazing into the darkness of the pit below. She knew her opponents were still alive. She could hear their hushed whispers echoing through the endless bale of wires lining the cavern. She was conflicted, a rare situation for her. On the one hand, Curse and Silence were enemies who would take her life if she didn't take theirs first. But on the other hand, they were still kids with their whole lives ahead of them. Besides, what would killing them accomplish? She pondered over her choices while lighting another cigarette and taking a deep. "I miss those days." Saratobi chewed on his pipe, a nervous habit that he thought had died ages ago. He had been resting peacefully that evening until he felt a faint rumbling beneath his feet. It was such a slight feeling that he doubted if any of the civilian population or even most of the lower-level ninjas felt it, but he knew anyone with exceptional skills would have sensed it. He sat with unease in his office, nodding at the elite shinobi as they appeared in the small room. The elder master ninja knew he didn't have to call for any of his subordinates. Any shinobi he would have wished to speak to regarding this disturbing matter would have felt the need to see him anyway. When the chamber became filled, he addressed the impromptu meeting. "You all felt that?" he asked simply, the gravity of the situation apparent in his voice. "Yes, sir," the general reply sounded. "Good." His gaze never faltered. "I believe you already know what to do. Search out the source and report back to me." A hail of acknowledgements was voiced, and most of the elite inhabitants promptly exited, leaving behind a select 3 shinobi. Lord Hokage Anko approached her superior. "This has to be Orochimaru's doing? We need to move now." "Patience, Anko," he attempted to console her. "We don't know if he's involved this time, although I pray he is. The last thing we need is another problem." But she began to argue. "No buts. I know how you feel about this, but now is not the time for an emotional outbreak." "Dismissed." The Mitarashi huffed and stormed out of the room. Kakashi watched her leave with a lazy eye, glanced at Kurenai to see if she was going next, and then spoke up. "Lord Hokage, it seems that these incidents are becoming more numerous. The fact that all of us felt it is a sign that whatever it is, it's becoming stronger or something like that. Saratobi glared at the former Anbu captain, although he didn't mean to. What would you suggest, Kakashi? Several teams of Anbu agents to perform a thorough sweep of the village. The aging man sighed. You know I can't do that. Things are complicated enough with the Chunin exams and Orochimaru. We're already stretched pretty thin. He took a deep puff of his pipe. This really couldn't have come at a worse time. I understand. The Jonin turned to leave the room, pulling his infamous book out as he did so. Did you have some concerns as well, Kurenai HM? The Yui paused, lost in thought. Oh, no sir. Mine were the same as Kakashi's. Very well. Dismissed. The red-eyed woman waltzed out of the room behind the haddock and passed his carefree pace with her swifter stride, glancing at him and making eye contact. Something on your mind? The silver-haired man asked, never breaking his eyes from his adult novel. It's nothing, she shook her head, just worried about a student of mine. He sure is talkative today, she mused for a moment before answering. Hinata Hyuga. I see. He fancied the idea of revealing his observations regarding Naruto to the woman before deciding against it. What's to worry about? Nothing, I suppose, she lied. I can't believe it. He's trying to pry information out of me. By this point, the duo had reached the door leading to the outside world and she smiled at Kakashi. Guess this is where we part ways. See you around. He looked up from his book and raised a palm in a pathetic attempt at a wave. She's hiding something. Could it be that Naruto's not the cause of any of this? Have I been looking in the wrong place all along? As the two geniuses did nothing but sit in the darkness at the bottom of the wire-bound pit. They spoke little, and instead Faku's been inflicted a few centimeters in certain directions. Silence, with the aid of Curse's seemingly never-ending chakra, closed all but the most superficial of her wounds, then turned her attention towards her temporary ally. She was amazed to find that the minor lacerations on his body had completely disappeared, while the major problems had begun to rectify themselves. Good lord, she mused as she ran her healing palms over the fellow genius. How much chakra does he have? Naruto, while still channeling his chakra to his partner so she could work her magic on him, analyzed the situation in his mind. During the bombardment of slicing winds that put the Konoha duo in this state, there was a small tugging at the back of his skull, the quietest of whispers, that gave him the feeling that he could reach out and touch the chakra-laced hair. Is it possible that my affinity is wind? He wondered. I never did test myself with the elements. While the Uzumaki pondered this new quandary, Hinata activated her Byakugan for a moment to scan the vertical tunnel for any nearby exits. She grimaced and snapped her bloodline off when she found no openings close by. They all existed far upwards, very close to awaiting Takemi. Why is she waiting? She inquired mentally. Does she want a challenge or something? Why didn't she come down here to finish us off when she had the chance? The girl then noticed a soft tune floating down the chamber. How had she not realized it before? Was she really that exhausted? And why was the foul-mouthed woman playing such a serene melody when, during the course of the short battle, she only played music that got the blood boiling? Everyone has a weakness, she stated inwardly. Could this be hers? And if it is, how? A few silent minutes passed, and the blonde's final major injury, his fractured left leg, was healed enough to allow easy movement. He stood to his feet and helped his tired ally up, saying nothing as he did so. When the girl was up, he blushed slightly upon the realization that her destroyed clothing practically hung off of her without support. Why, a simple hard tug could remove it all. What the hell am I thinking? He shook his head to clear his gutter of a mind. Now is not the time for that. He leaned in close to the fellow prodigy and whispered, Did you see any exits nearby? No, she wheezed as she sluggishly shook her head. They're all up there, close to Takemi. Damn, he swore and clenched his teeth. Aside from being stiff and sore, he felt up to the challenge the guitar-wielding enemy presented, but he could tell Silence was in no condition to fight. She needed rest and medical attention, badly. An idea struck him. This'll be risky, he knew, but I don't see any other way if she's going to survive. He placed his hands on the blue-haired girl's shoulders to grab her attention. I have a plan, but it's risky, really risky. What is it? She replied between gulps of air. I can channel some of my chakra into your system, he lied. It was actually the fox's energy. His had dried up long ago. But I have no idea if there'll be any side effects or what they might be. If everything goes well, you'll have enough energy. All right, he sighed. He ran his fingers over some slick blood on his body, moved Hinata's tattered clothing over her abdomen to the side, and painted a seal similar to the one on his own stomach. It was fundamentally different in that it wouldn't trap anything within the confines of her soul, but the portion that would merge chakra into her system was still there. He invoked a particularly large surge of the fox's energy into his right hand, an action that he absolutely loathed, and gazed into his partner's hidden pale eyes. Here goes. He slammed his palm into the temporary seal and squeezed his brilliant azure eyes shut when the girl's recently healed lips parted in a silent scream. Takemi sat atop her stone perch, still playing that soft melody that she never tired of and taking long gulps of whiskey when only one hand was needed during certain intervals. Upon polishing off the clean glass bottle she was working on, she tossed it over the side and, still plucking away at the chords of her deep crimson battle guitar, fingered a locket hidden under her messy shirt. It contained the only picture she had of her daughter when she was young, and it was, next to her daughter, the most precious thing she possessed. She chuckled at the memory. When she first bought the golden heart-shaped piece of jewelry, she, hardcore Takemi, had finally stooped to motherhood despite being one of the strongest badasses in her arena. She sighed in remembrance of days gone by, her old home, her old crew. She left it all up north and brought her daughter in search of a better life. But then they met that bastard of a leader, and it all went to hell faster than she could chug alcohol. She snapped out of her melancholic revelry when she heard sounds approaching her heightened position. She stood and glanced over the side of her granite bridge to find the young enemies nearing. Will they try to escape? She wondered, noting that they were coming up to the first wire-crossed exits. They passed the impeded openings without so much as a glance. Guess not. Looks like I have no choice. She brought her musical weapon to bear and, once again, began a melody that screeched with heart-pounding adrenaline, intense brutality, and absolute bliss. Naruto was silently thankful that things went well. The chakra transfer didn't seem to have any ill effects on his ally, but she was still not up to full capacity. He didn't care to risk loading her up with the Nine-Tails demonic energy in her weakened state, so he did the next best thing, carried her. Her legs were wrapped around his sides as he hefted her across his back. She could still use her arms and, in case of extreme emergencies, separate from him for a short period of time. Works out for the best, he mused happily. Now I don't have to worry about her getting caught in the crossfire, and she feels so damn soft too. Wind's coming again, Hinata shouted in his ear. She swallowed hard, nervousness beginning to manifest at her core. Curse had told her his revelation, and, while brilliant and kinda cool, it would kill them if it failed. Uzumaki said nothing as he leapt off the wired wall in time to avoid being impaled by the air onto a suspended walkway that had survived the onslaught. In a single bound, he moved to the center of the outcropping and leapt up again, hoping that Takemi's sides of air couldn't reach the very middle of the vertical cavern. He began to twist in midair to protect himself and his intelligent charge when his prediction proved correct. As the blonde carried her, the Hyuga activated her bloodline to gaze at the enemy. She noted that, despite the fact that the blades of wind coursing from the wires were ineffective this time, the whiskey-guzzling woman didn't stop the tune. Instead, the opponent's harsh amber eyes were closed, and a look of content was plastered on her face. Is she even paying attention to us? She wondered, or is she concentrated on the music itself? The tough commander's eyes snapped open in the suddenly realization that her current actions weren't working, and she shifted the tune to a familiar ear-busting melody. The wires wrapping around several bridges vibrated and tightened, cutting into the solid granite. Hinata instantly recognized the oral change. The walkways were being forcibly removed again. I think the attack that got us last time is coming up again, she yelled, making her blonde rival wince. Got it, he shot back as he continued the vertical bum rush. As predicted, the precipices crumbled from their positions and began to fall away, sending a hail of debris his way. He focused chakra into his legs and nimbly dodged the descending stone as it came, touching the walls only when he needed additional leverage. He didn't want a repeat of the veritable tornado of lethal winds again. The tune shifted again, and the blonde didn't need to recognize it in order to know what it entailed. As before, the wires rattled violently, and an uncountable surge of deadly blades of air arsed from the metal strings, slicing whatever was in their way. Here goes, he thought as he focused on his feet and shot them out against the nearest scythe of wind. Concentrated solely on affiliating with the chakra-enhanced air, whatever that meant, he threw a leg upwards, willing the non-existent blade to follow a similar motion. Miraculously, it worked. The slicing spiral twirled upwards, colliding. It worked. Silence breathed a sigh of relief, temporarily ignoring the fact that many thousands of these arcs of wind still sputtered towards them. Her arms shot out and, with a combination of her dual-stake launchers and gentle fist style, began to move the largest portions of falling granite into positions that best shielded the duo. It wasn't perfect, but it would help her ally immensely, and it did. Naruto mentally thanked his attached partner for being his arms as he began a dance between the tumbling rocks and pulsing air, diverting as much of the deadly winds as he could with his armored feet. As the unnerving minutes passed, Hinata once again activated her Byakugan to catch a glimpse of Takemi. She really is caught up in the music, her sharp mind noted. That's it? She loves her music more than the fight? She gets distracted by it too easily. She considered sharing this revelation with the boy holding her to his back, but squelched the idea. He was having enough trouble as is, he didn't need his attention distracted by something that was inconsequential at the moment. The rubble that once made up several stone bridges passed, and the whirlwind of deadly air quickly followed suit. The Konoha duo knew that their hard-rocking You kids are good, Takemi shouted, putting a hold on her adrenaline-inducing music in favor of a cigarette and a bottle of whiskey. Haven't had such a challenge since I tried to kill my leader. Who's your leader? The Uzumaki yelled out, not really expecting an answer. She didn't reply. Instead, her head fell back as she upturned the clean glass container of alcohol. Who is he? Maybe we could help you kill him. Hinata chimed in. Maybe the woman would be distracted if they could get her talking. Talk is cheap, the foul-mouthed quitteress muttered as she finished her drink and stuck the unfiltered cigarette between her lips. With a mighty inhale, she reduced the oral fixation to nothing in a second, then lurched forward, spewing forth an amazing jet of searing flame. Naruto leapt like a frog on acid to avoid the fires that flowed like water. She's burning the alcohol with the cigarettes, he murmured, mildly impressed that she managed to disguise powerful techniques under the illusion of personal vices. He didn't have time to analyze the moves, though. Takemi finished her unorthodox move and was prepping her heavy instrument for more music. We need to get close to her, the Hyuga whispered in the boy's ear. We can't do anything to her from this range. The blonde genius grimaced. He hated to admit it, but silence was right. Takemi's skills complemented themselves, and her experience was obviously superior to their own. All right, he stated under his breath and channeled energy to his legs. Here we go. The instant his armored jet sandals left the stone, a violent gash of wind swept across the fire-strewn bridge, fanning the flames and engulfing the granite walkway with incinerating heat. He could barely see through the obonegration, and a feeling of worry washed over him due to the lack of sight. Hinata sensed the slight spike of fear and snapped her bloodline on. She couldn't use it indefinitely, seeing as how the transferred chakra was limited, but she could at least help out this much. Lowering her lips to his ear, she began to quietly relay the necessary movements to the blonde prodigy. Meanwhile, the booze-guzzling foreigner was completely entranced by her own melody. She knew it was a fault, but she couldn't help it. Rock and roll was her life, her soul. In the old days before her pregnancy, she was solely defined by her battle-worthy tunes and their lethal tenacity. She was lost in the chords, ignoring the crystal-clear sounds echoing through the wire's vibrations. At the moment, the only thing of any importance was finishing this song, but that was not to be. Suddenly, curse and silence appeared from the dark smoke onto her precipice several meters away. The azure-masked girl aimed her right arm at her, and a burst of steam erupted from the metal tubes belted onto the offending limb. Takemi instantly and awkwardly slammed her fingers across the chords, invoking a heavily thrummed tune and a flickering dome of pulsing air that formed around her and rushed out, thrusting the oncoming stakes away. You survived all that, the foul-mouthed woman stated simply, lips curled like they were about to spit. Naruto didn't bother to reply before charging at the woman. He couldn't unseal anything since he carried his rival on his back, but that unusual setup allowed for several options in hand-to-hand combat. As the Konoha prodigies approached, the foreign guitarist began a new melody, an incredibly fast-paced tune that echoed with amplified intensity against the many wires. A slew of slicing winds flowed towards the two, but to the Uzumaki who had recently dodged an attack hundreds of times more difficult, this was nothing. He swiftly sidestepped with the ease and grace of an experienced swordsman around the passing non-existent blades, and reached the target only to have a solid fist slam into his chest and knock him man's silence back at least 20 feet. He skidded to a halt and willed himself not to fall over from the sudden lack of air in his lungs. Holy hell, he stated internally, since taking simple breaths was now a trying task. She's strong. Curse, Hinata spoke up. She had felt the force transfer through her partner, and also had the wind knocked out of her. You okay? He wheezed, nodding his head as he did so. The Hyuga glanced up to peer at the enemy, to find the woman standing right in front of them, with the crimson guitar reeled back in preparation for a heavy strike. Shy Silence didn't have time to complete the swearing before she and Naruto were violently knocked off the suspended walkway by the hardest object she had ever felt in her life. As the two tumbled to the next bridge, she winced at the pain in her side. 3 broken ribs, she analyzed, suddenly realizing that since her rival was carrying her piggyback and she was struck from the side in the ribs, that would put the guitar around his neck or shoulder. The genius girl didn't have time to catch the boy before slamming into the precipice below, further driving home her newly cracked bones. She mentally stifled the pain, rose to her feet, and stumbled over to the blonde. She approached him as he tried to stand and help him up, observing his injuries with her bloodline before deactivating it. Dislocated shoulder, broken clavicle, and a crack in the scapula, the Uzumaki grit his teeth as he painfully popped his joint back into place. "You okay?" he inquired, turning to gaze at Silence's masked face before his mouth dropped open in horrific surprise. "Look out!" Hinata didn't have time to react to the warning before Takemi, who had followed them in their agonizing descent, grasped her by the neck and threw her backwards onto the ground hard enough to cause the intelligent girl's body to bounce on contact. "Silence!" the blonde shouted as he moved to unseal his ninjato and bring it down on the enemy in a singular motion. Unfortunately, the alcohol-guzzling ninja was ready for him. Her steel-reinforced guitar was halfway in its overhead arc towards the boy's head. Curse only had enough time to move his skull out of the way before the instrument buried itself into his other shoulder, snapping his opposing clavicle in half as well as breaking the uppermost rib. He faltered and received a powerful steel-plated boot to the chest, once again emptying his lungs of air and sending him a dozen feet back. Takemi saw the boy hit the ground and struggle fruitlessly to stand. She then grasped the girl behind her by the leg and flung her into the prone Prodigy. Despite her cold demeanor, this was a difficult endeavor for her. She was combating the one thing she had: a weakness for children. Ironically, if she didn't have a daughter herself, this wouldn't have been a problem, but it was not so. The logical portion of her mind was valiantly repressing her twisted morals as it commanded her to eliminate the weakened enemies before her. "Time to end this," she stated lifelessly, bringing her guitar to bear. She charged an especially large amount of chakra into her musical instrument and shot her arm down in a powerful strum, ejecting an intensified scythe of slicing wind at the Konoha duo. It whistled through the air on the sounds of the guitar's sole chord and right into the waiting hand of Curse. The boy had shot up at the last possible instant and, with an obvious degree of pained exertion, grasped the lethal non-existent blade. In a single motion, he spun on his heel, flipped the lethal chakra-induced hair around, and flung it back at the foul-mouthed woman. This time, Takemi couldn't respond in time. That blast took extra effort to build up, so it was stronger. She didn't have the necessary seconds to build up another shot that could counter the backfired blade, and she knew her legs weren't swift enough to move her body out of the way. Her instincts kicked in and she moved, but, as the rational portion of her brain predicted, it was to no avail. The scythe of wind passed straight through her reinforced guitar and nearly bisected her, not doing so because the instrument took the initial blow. She immediately collapsed in an ever-widening pool of her own blood, her innards only staying on the relative inside due to gravity. Naruto and Hinata worked their way over to the defeated opponent, their severe wounds protesting the entire duration. They approached the woman and gazed at something they had never seen on her worn face until now: resignation. For the first time in a long while, Takemi could feel her own cold tears running down her face. With a trembling hand, she reached for the locket hidden under her crimson sleeveless shirt, jerked it off her neck, and gazed at the faded picture within. She choked, the life fading from her raspy voice and amber eyes. "I never got to see her again." The Hyuga recalled how almost every foreign opponent she had battled alongside her ally had a tale of misfortune. It must be the same for her as well, she thought. "Who?" she asked in a soft tone. The dying woman's eyes never broke from her locket. "My." Hinata gazed at the aging photo. In it, a little girl probably no more than 5 clung onto a Takemi who looked to be 20 or so. Both sported ear-to-ear smiles, evidence of happier times. "Looks just like her," the intelligent girl commented as she pocketed the keepsake and wandered over to the wall, taking a seat with extreme care so as to not agitate her painful injuries. Naruto did the same and sat next to her. His body screamed at his mind, and he knew that a single night's sleep wouldn't make it go away, so he started, his voice heavy as it fought for air. "Will you be okay?" She nodded. "I'll be fine. Just need some sleep." As if by command, her fleeting consciousness left, and she nodded off on her rival's shoulder, lost in unbiased slumber. Yet the blonde agreed, even though he knew she couldn't hear him. He wondered if any enemies would find them, but his exhausted mind reminded him of the desolation throughout the foreigner control tunnels. I guess it'll be fine. Naruto found himself, once again, standing in a darkened waterlogged prison before a set of massive gates. He knew this place well, and he absolutely hated it. It was the source of his freakish healing abilities and inhuman stamina, but it also served as his sole source of pain. Peering into the glaring crimson eyes above, he stared down the nine-tailed fox behind its bars. Back again so soon? The demon's thunderous voice roared. Haven't you had enough? Boy Curse glared daggers at the evil entity. You know the drill. Give me some more chakra so I can heal myself. The environment shook as the fox laughed. Heal yourself? Foolish child, who do you think heals you in the first place? The Uzumaki didn't reply to the jibe. Give me more chakra now, he demanded calmly. Fine. The demon chuckled as its unholy energy pooled from the cage and surrounded the boy below. But remember this, you do not control me. I merely keep you alive so that I may have a chance to escape this accursed seal. Whatever, the blonde waved off the thread as he felt the newfound chakra seep into his physical body. I can keep that seal up forever. The scenery rumbled violently as the fox laughed heartily at such a bold comment. Foolish child, you know nothing of the world and what resides in the shadows. In the shadows? He wondered. And when you come to understand how futile it is to resist, I will be free once again. Naruto sneered at the cryptic message and strode away from the large cage as the water sloshing around his feet rippled and splashed against the roaring laughter of the demon fox. In the shadows he murmured to no one. Did the fox just give me a hint? When the boy was out of sight, the ancient evil force huddled into a comfortable position, still chuckling to itself. And I'm sure the ancient one will make you realize that, boy. He's closer than you think. I can smell him. Curse's hidden azure eyes shot open as he jolted to reality. He immediately noticed his rather intimate sleeping setup with the female rival, and thoughts of unmasking her flooded into his now active mind. A few seconds ticked by as he mulled the idea over in his head, and he reached his aching arm around to grip the dull blue visage only to have a soft hand shoot up and grasp his wrist with determination. What are doing? A weary voice floated from Silence's sore lips as they upturned into a small grin. I'm not letting you off that easy. Fine, Naruto sighed, clambering to his feet despite his protesting bones. He rolled his arms in their sockets to gauge the damage. They're not totally healed, but another surge of chakra ought to do the trick. Deciding to analyze the defeated enemy's equipment, he limped over to Takemi's bisected guitar and picked it up, turning the separate pieces over in his hands as he did so. A large section of the bulky steel lining the instrument clattered to the ground as gravity took its toll, revealing a small pattern groove on the inside. Hey, check this out. He glanced at the insignia, then casually tossed it to Hinata. The Hyuga caught the piece of metal from her seated position, fractured ribs still screaming at her to not move. Ha, she examined the familiar smooth indent. This is the mark of the Sound Village. Yeah, the Uzumaki stated absent-mindedly, recalling Orochimaru's assault on his team during the second portion of the Chunin exams. He had been playing possum while the legendary ninja was partially unmasked, and he had burned the distinct village insignia into his memory. Orochimaru wore a Sound Village headband. Orochimaru? Silence inquired, surprised to hear that name repeated. Lately, Shiori and Ichiru had been recording conversations within the Hokage Tower, mentioning the rogue shinobi. He's a pretty hot topic in the village right now. What do you think his affiliation with the Sound Village could be? Dunno, he shrugged, wincing from his cracked collarbones. He's a Sannin, so I'd expect him to be the one calling the shots, but I'd rather not assume anything. It'd be bad if he was just a subordinate and we didn't know it. He paused, lost in thought. You think there's any way to confirm it? Hinata nodded, recalling the other party most often involved with the Hokage when it came to discussing the Snake Master. Yeah, there's this one ninja, Anko Mitarashi. She seems to have a history with him. I'll bet she could tell you. Curse mulled the familiar name around in his head as he collected the scattered pieces of Takemi's musical weapon and sealed them into the vanishing tattoos on his back. Without a word, he then waltzed over to the Hyuga and carefully lifted her into his arms, his slowly healing bones arguing at the motion. He started leaping across the battle-worn bridges in search of an exit, locating one rather easily this time around. All right, he stated, fighting the nagging temptation to sneak a peek under the girl's tattered clothing. Call those freaks of yours to pick you up at the hub. The hub? She didn't know the tunnels had names. That shaft where we usually meet up. She responded, tapping the tiny wireless device at the side of her damaged visage and sending a distress signal to her hidden chamber. It shouldn't be too late outside, the blonde mused internally. I think it's time to pay a visit to that snake lady. As the Konoha duo departed from the scene of the tremendous battle, a pair of eyes observed them from the shadows. The apathetic eyes of the moist sensory organs watch the youths with intense and uncaring concentration, noting their physical states as well as their psychological reactions to the situation placed before them. The disembodied eyes move like phantoms through the darkness, following the path of the prodigies until they went their separate ways. So the commander of this recon force has been removed by these two. The boss will be quite interested to witness their growth. With that, the anomaly known as Sten vanished entirely from the known network of tunnels. As the night sky dissolved into a pristine violet upon the sun's arrival over that portion of the world, Anko Mitarashi arrived home after a fruitless evening's search for the odd that pulsed throughout the village many hours ago. She was tired and hungry. "I'll wolf some dango and juice down," she mentally prepared a course of action, then hit the hay. Holy shit, the special Jonan all but hit the ceiling as she passed through her living room on the way to the kitchen, almost not even noticing the menacing stranger sitting in absolute silence on a table in front of the couch. "Who the hell are you?" she shouted, knives at the ready. "Keep your voice down," Curse ordered, completely unfazed at the threatening gestures presented against him. "The neighbors will hear you. Identify your MMF." Anko couldn't believe it. Here she was, an elite Jonin of the Hidden Leaf Village, standing in her own home with weapons drawn, and this absolute stranger, in the blink of an eye, had traversed the space of the room, restrained her arms, and covered her mouth simultaneously. "Who is this guy?" "I told you to be quiet," the Uzumaki repeated. "Now, will you be good and stop yelling?" He received a begrudging nod, and released his hand from her mouth. "Phew," he sighed internally, glad she didn't put up a fight. "My wounds still haven't healed completely. What do you want?" she asked in a demanding tone, moving away from the stranger with kunai blades still drawn. "Who are you?" "You can call me Curse," Naruto replied, taking a seat on the table once again. "And before you freak out, I'm only here to confirm something." The sweets lover arsed an eyebrow, but didn't move otherwise. "What? You're familiar with Orochimaru, right?" "What?" her inner self shouted. "How do you know about him?" "Only the Hokage and I." The Mitarashi frowned, recalling her unpleasant dialogue with her former backstabbing master in the Forest of Death. "I think he's the leader. Are you sure?" "How do you know that?" he said. She paused, struggling to remember the man's exact words. "About 3 from my village." "I see," Naruto said, taking all this new information in jovially. "Well, that settles that matter. Now, who are you exactly?" she threatened, flinching to show her preparedness. "Hold on, one thing at a time." He reached to the seals on his back and unleashed the pieces of Takemi's guitar, carefully setting them down before him and pushing them together to present a complete picture. "Does this ring a bell?" Anko stared at the broken crimson instrument, something nagging at the back of her mind. She had forever cursed Orochimaru for wiping her memory, but occasionally a certain object, location, or event would jar her subconscious, invoking a lost recollection. This looked so familiar. She strained her eyes and her head started to hurt. "Have I seen this before? Where was it?" Her eyes suddenly snapped open and she yelled, "Takemi!" Commander Takemi, the undercover genius, smiled under his hastily repaired mask. "Yeah, that's right. Did you know her?" She shivered at the mere mention of the woman's name. She didn't know the chain-smoking warrior well, but everything she did know wasn't good. She was very harsh. "Do you know what she was doing here?" "She's here," the special Jonin whispered, horrified that such a terrifying woman was in the same village as her. "Well, kinda. He thought about how to word it, indefinitely indisposed. "I'm just wondering why she and her troops were here. There were others," she spoke under her breath. Her mind was aflutter with an unprecedented surge of memories regarding the guitarist. She tried to assassinate Orochimaru with a bunch of others. They failed, then disappeared, I think." Curse nodded. He was content with this answer. He began resealing the destroyed weapon back into his tattoos before rising to his feet. He went for the window and turned back to face the flustered woman. "I would appreciate it if you don't tell anybody about me or our little chat today. Life will be a lot simpler that way." He smiled brightly, hoping his benevolent threat got through to the snake charmer. "Wait, who are you?" she cried, still reeling from the recent influx of memories. "Just a friend who doesn't exist." His smirk grew from ear to ear. "I'd like it to stay that way, unless you'd like a shorter life." Anko was rendered speechless. She merely nodded her understanding. "Good. Later." With that, the prodigy shimmered from view as the sun began to peek over the horizon. Mitarashi, still in a daze, strolled into her kitchen and started going through the motions preparing some of her favorite sweet snack food. She poured a cup of juice and stared at it. "Screw that," she said to no one, whereas Thesic Jiraiya, per usual, was viewing a gaggle of young women through his trusty spyglass, drooling a veritable waterfall. The true reasons behind his research were rooted deep in misfortune and would haunt him until the day he died, but he paid them little mind as often as he could dot behind the aged pervert. Naruto struggled to summon an actual frog for the millionth time while causing a ruckus. While this had been established as routine by now, the Toad Master had his suspicions. He was tired when he showed up this morning, he mused as he peered through the lenses at a particularly well-endowed woman in a swimsuit. Judging from the veins in his eye, deciding to see how capable his impromptu pupil was, he came up with a risky idea that, if successfully executed, would have a huge payoff. He ordered the boy to follow him, and, after a short trek, positioned him nearby a seemingly bottomless cavern carved by the numerous waterfalls in the area. He vaguely informed the blonde on what needed to be done, and promptly shoved him into the chasm. As predicted, the outcome was indeed beneficial. As if it were nothing, the boy summoned the greatest of toads, Gamabunta. The Sannin was impressed with the lad's performance, but had a difficult time believing that Naruto invoked the boss frog himself on mere luck alone. I couldn't summon Gamabunta until years after signing the toad contract. It only took him less than a month, and he started with freaking tadpoles. Something's up, he sighed. The question is, what Hinata slept well into high noon, attributing her uncharacteristically lengthy slumber to a revival in her injuries incurred during the preliminary exams. Of course, this wasn't a complete falsehood. Her fractured ribs inflicted by Takemi warranted bed rest, and she was more than happy to utilize the fact that Niji kicked her asses in order to get away with oversleeping. Before committing to extensive rest with the early morning sun, she had consumed a cocktail of drugs she prepared in order to promote extreme blood production and calcium growth, as well as act as a sedative and painkiller to help her sleep and ward off the sharp pain. When she awoke, the sun had begun its gradual descent in the sky, signifying the arrival of the afternoon. She toyed with the idea of rolling over and going back to sleep. When she was informed of a visitor, oh great, she whined internally, sour mood affecting her temperament. If it's Kiba coming to check up on me again, I'm gonna spay and neuter him on the spot. She waltzed down the maze of identical hallways until she reached the courtyard reserved for guests. Hinata, Kurenai broke the girl from her thoughts as she approached the undercover prodigy. How are you feeling today? Shino and Kiba came by earlier and told me that you weren't feeling well. I'm fine, she coughed. It must be our relapse. The Yui smiled to thwart the frown she almost conveyed. What happened to her mouth? She noted the tightness in her charge's usually soft lips and filed it away for later. Is there something you want me to get for you? Some sweets or something? I'll be fine. She really wanted to hack up a lung. Just need to rest. Alright. The Genjutsu user peered after the girl until she was out of sight, then made way for the compound gates to leave. Were those new injuries? She wondered, thinking back to the unusually taut skin apparent in several places on her student's lips and arms. She didn't have those the other day, but such large portions like those don't heal in a day. She shook her head, waving her slick hair back and forth. Maybe I'm looking too deeply into this. Maybe those aren't wounds at all, but her skin is usually so smooth. Why is it not today? Could it be scarring? Damn it all, she cursed internally in her frustration, a rare occurrence for her calm and collected self. Why can't I figure this out? While Kurenai beat her brains out attempting to decipher the Hyuga's complex secret, the blue-haired girl strolled back into her room while carefully avoiding all the other members of her family. When she re-entered her chamber, she uprooted the mat that covered the entrance to her secondary lab, her much smaller home away from home. Been a while since I've been down here, she mused as she squeezed through the cramped horizontal doorway and flipped on the displays to the outside of her room and adjoining hallways. She set up those hidden cameras so she would have plenty of time to evacuate the secret room in case someone came to bother her. She didn't feel like doing too much today, merely checking up on her numerous espionage devices placed in various portions of the village would do. First up, she dialed into the monitors lining the Hokage Tower. Nothing new here, she mused as she flipped the channels to the hospital, a glimmer of hope that someone with injuries similar to Curse would show up. Nothing here either. After a while she began to grow bored. Seemingly nothing was out of the ordinary today. She switched the monitors to the final stop on her list, the hive underneath Konoha. Since the place was so desolate, video feeds were pretty much worthless, and audio was rare enough to warrant not wasting sensitive microphones, so that left receivers that could pick up a wide range of radio transmissions. This was how Shiori and Ichiru detected the underground sound army, so she prayed that something new would be on these bands. Handai stretcho transitions, Kamishwa since the place. Wichiru destillated video free where Predator pale hand slowly cranked the dial, stopping every few seconds to Jurin HQ come in, a voice popped and sputtered on the sketchy band. HQ copy find anything? Think Fumetsu's body commander negative. Still the line hissed for a moment. Understood. All squads report. Squad 9 nothing team here either squad that's a negative. Hinata listened to a stream of teams continue to report in the negative. They're looking for something she concluded quietly, or someone she hushed up and continued to hear out the broken chatter. After a few more minutes, the formality and the many voices died out, and suddenly carried worry damn it to Kami. Know anything Karen? Nope shut fucking loyalist you shut temper, Garaza that loyalist why? A girl's voice came through clear for once. Takemi's gone where do what we want has any found commander where's Takemi the Hyuga grew tired of listening to the undercover sound forces bickering. This is good, she smirked to herself, now that Takemi's gone, their leadership's not there to hold them together anymore. They're falling apart. On that note, she cut the feed and clambered out of protected pit with the intent of sleeping some more. Kabuto, Orochimaru addressed his subordinate in his usual sleazy tone. Have you heard any news from our dear reconnaissance force? Yes sir, the treacherous medic replied, adjusting his glasses as he did so. They claim that they've mapped out the tunnels underneath Konoha, and have pinpointed strike points for vital locations within the village. He licked his lips with that disgustingly long tongue of his. Did you hear this from Takemi? No sir. I spoke to her second in command, Fumetsu, he replied. He had heard rumors that a believer in the murderous Jashin religion followed the Snake Sannin's command, but he had never seen or even spoken to the man until today. Really. The legendary ninja had expected the foul-mouthed woman to personally check in with him, seeing as how he had the upper hand over her. Yes, he has assured me that everything is going according to your instructions. Good. Orochimaru doubted that. After all, the recon force was comprised of brigands and cutthroats who had tried on numerous occasions to kill him or at least undermine his absolute authority. Then give the word for their reinforcements to move. I want that army complete and ready to move out on time. Yes, my lord. He bowed slightly, then swiftly departed the scene. Takemi, the slithery shinobi said to no one, you remember our agreement, do you not? I certainly hope you don't try anything reckless. He chuckled to himself at the remembrance of the deal struck with the woman who came close to slaying him once. A shimmering light of every possible, and even a few impossible colors, bathed an otherwise dark room with swimming illumination. Before this light stood four solitary figures that watched intently as the scene with the Snake Sannin unfolded. When the backstabbing ninja ordered his underling away, the cascading illumination swallowed itself and disappeared from reality, casting the large chamber into relative darkness. It seems Orochimaru has been fooled, Sten commented, stating the obvious. Quite a brilliant ploy, the man in the faded blue suit continued as he adjusted his tie, exercised by his own subordinates. It certainly seems that way, the purported leader of the small group said with a simple smile. He's sending reinforcements who are loyal to him to his reconnaissance force which mostly opposes him. What do you make of it? Sten the hooded man considered the quandary for a moment with an impassive face. The recon force is stronger than an average ninja force. Since they lied to Orochimaru, it can be assumed that they have no intentions of helping him, rather they seem inclined to dispose of him, and anyone associated with him. And what do you believe the result shall be? Once again, a minor silence. The reinforcements will be slaughtered. Excellent deduction, Sten, the shadowed man clapped his hands together. I believe your prediction is accurate to the letter. Now gentlemen, he addressed all three individuals before him, this reconnaissance force is dangerous to Konoha regardless of its affiliation. It is comprised of cold-hearted murderers and killers who could care less about human life. Furthermore, he began to pace around the large room. They are not supposed to be here in the first place. A man wearing a pristine porcelain mask that flowed across the features of his face like water cocked his head slightly. He never spoke, so his actions revealed volumes about his thoughts. Of course, the man instantly understood the gesture as an inquiry. We did not possess a contract with the elders of Konoha when that force was stationed here so long ago, meaning that we had no obligation to eradicate them. But now that they pose a threat, the terms of the agreement dictate that we handle the situation quietly. He eyed his men with benevolence and a small smile. Are there any questions or concerns? No answer. They understood perfectly. Excellent. He turned to the emotionless hooded man. Sten, I believe your talents alone are enough to quell the threat. Yes sir, he replied, nodding his head. And my role? The pale man in the suit interjected, curious about his job. Please assist the good doctor in obtaining whatever he requires. Your assistance is invaluable with acquisitioning valuable goods. He hummed and adjusted his tie. Again. The stranger in the liquid ivory mask tick his head ever so slightly to the side. Phantos, please continue in your work to keep our associates from intruding into our organization's separate dealings. It is poor business practice to allow conflicting partners to intermingle. Anko stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring herself down with bloodshot eyes. Despite polishing off an entire bottle of sake, she couldn't sleep. Instead, her aching head swam with the encounter with the man known as Curse. Who is he? She wondered, splashing cold water on her face in an attempt to dull the headache. Even better, what does he want? He wanted to know Orochimaru's connection with the sound, and he obviously knows more about that old bastard's plan than any of us. A sudden realization struck her. Wait, he knew about Takemi, and he knew about her being in Konoha. That's a hell of a lot more than what the Hokages dug up. Is he an operative? A double agent maybe? No, she caught herself with the foolishness of that statement. He would have already known the answer to his question if he was. So what does that make him? Is he an Anbu? Couldn't be. He threatened me to keep quiet. She began to pace around her humble apartment, lost in thought as she went through an automated set of movements in preparation for duty. Could he be an outside threat? That would explain why I've never seen him around, but why would he be interested in taking down Orochimaru? Or does he want to join him? He never said. She recalled the broken instrument and put two and two together. No, he had Takemi's weapon. That probably means he took her down, so that means I'm back to square one. Arg. She scrubbed her head roughly with her hands in frustration. Who is he? She didn't realize she was outdoors until she started hearing the murmurs of the civilian traffic. What the hell, what's she doing, mommy? Oh, it's just that freak crap. The Mitarashi realized she was so lost in thought that she reached a new plane of existence as far as distractions went. She started scratching her head and laughing like an idiot. Nothing to see here, folks. Move along. Weird. That's interesting. Crazy bitch. She bared her teeth, not so much at the demeaning crowd, but rather at her own display of foolishness. This is your fault, Curse. Now I've got to find you. The days passed slowly in Konoha, at least, for the residing ninjas it did. The village was at one of its busiest times of the year. The final round of the Chunin exams was one day away. Perimeters had to be secured and patrolled endlessly. Massive influxes of foreign ninjas and feudal lords had to be managed with utmost care, and casual spectators flooded the local markets and hotels in preparation for the big day. Saratobi was feeling restless. Despite his superior status, even he felt the changes around him. The endless paperwork had easily doubled, perhaps tripled. He wasn't too sure. All I know is there's too much damn reading and signing, he complained internally, his hands starting to cramp from so many stamps and signatures. Sat back in his chair and decided to take a well-deserved break. Standing and starting towards the comfortable break room, he unearthed his pipe and stuffed some tobacco in it. When he sat down on one of the couches, he lit the calming substance and took a deep pull, relaxing his old bones as the nicotine coursed through his veins. Now that he had time to himself, all his worries came crashing down on him at once. How many things could go wrong tomorrow, he wondered, exhaling a cord of ivory smoke. First there's Orochimaru. God only knows what he's up to. If anything should happen to the nobles in the village, there could be an international incident. Hell, it could even start another war. He grimaced at that idea. And on top of that, I have those strange feelings on my plate. I pray that those surges of chakra are only Orochimaru's doings. If they turn out to be a separate threat, I won't know what to do. We're already stretched too thin. If there's another outside hostility, things could get bad. Real bad. He polished off the tobacco in his pipe and reached for more, finding he had misplaced his bag. Frowning, he dug deeper into his cloak, then saw the felt container lying on the table before him. Did I put that there? He muttered, extracting more of the oral fixation from it. I really am getting old. He lit the stuff, took another whiff, and puffed out a brilliant cloud of hot mist. I just can't help but feel that something bad will happen tomorrow. Whoa, he suddenly felt dizzy and blinked to clear his head. It didn't help, and the vertigo only intensified. Poison? He whispered in a panic hush as his body began to go numb and stiffen to the point of being paralyzed. Fear coursed through his body when he realized he had become completely immobile in the isolated room. Sorry about that, a soft voice spoke quietly into his ear. A person, a young girl, if basic appearances were worth anything, wearing a bizarre suit with strange mechanical and electrical devices, walked around in front of him and swiped the bag of faux tobacco from the table. Don't worry, this stuff will wear off in a few minutes. Here's your snuff back. She shoved the real bag back into his tunic, took a casual seat on the furniture in front of him, and then pulled out a syringe. Don't worry about this either, her easygoing tone reassured. It's to help you forget about this encounter. Oh, she cried, sorry. I'm called Silence. You're not going to remember that, but you've been kinda curious about me and my friend for a while. Hinata giggled to herself. That was the first time she, or anyone at all for that matter, had referred to Curse as her friend. She eased the needle into Saratobi's arm and injected the serum, healing the prick in his skin when she was finished. Her smooth azure mask peered up, and her pale bloodline eyes noticed the Hokage's eyes fluttering. Good, this stuff's working so far. It was similar to the hypnotism drug she had used on Hanabi a while back, but much more potent and selective. She was hoping it would have the effect of imprinting data into an individual's mind, while erasing the encounter in which said person received information. Listen very carefully. The trees and their green foliage whizzed by in a smear as a certain neon orange-clad ninja leapt from branch to branch in search of his quarry. Sakura followed closely behind Naruto, while the undercover genius's mind raced. The Santu, he thought, honestly taken by surprise that the siege of Konoha was a joint invasion. Can't say I saw that one coming. The day had started out innocent enough. The Uzumaki made his way to the main stadium in the morning, resisting the urge to pet Hinata on the head when he ran into her on his brief journey. The blonde promptly kicked the popular event off with his initial match against Niji Hyuga, a self-proclaimed prodigy. Kurz had to stifle guffaws of laughter during his competition. His wide-eyed opponent had so many holes and flaws in his superior fighting style that it was hilarious. Afterwards, the fights continued on while Sasuke arrived late, really late. God prick. Naruto screamed mentally, knowing full well that the Sharingan user should have been disqualified several times over, but received special treatment. All because of that damn bloodline. I swear, he promised himself, I ever get the chance, I'm gonna pluck those eyes out of his head during the spoiled orphans match with the psychotic Sand Shinobi, said demented ninja transformed. The blonde instantly recognized the change in relation to Gaara's demon and fought back the instinct to interrupt the mock battle. Instead, he noted the general mood of the crowd and found it to be shifting. Something was about to happen, and it did. It turned out that Orochimaru had somehow coerced the hidden sand village to cooperate with his own forces in the destruction of Konoha. Gaara was, apparently, the ace up their sleeve, but he suffered a bit of a breakdown and was escorted away by his siblings. Naruto, still keeping his cool and acting like his usual idiotic visage, followed Kakashi's orders to back up Sasuke, who had pursued the Sans demon container. The blonde genius sniffed the air and smelled blood. The Uchiha was nearby. He quickened his pace, and, soon enough, the exhausted Sharingan user came into view. The spoiled boy was lying prone before a semi-transformed Gaara, and his chakra was almost completely depleted despite the curse seal. Uzumaki smirked to himself. Today he could upstage Sasuke, and he wouldn't even have to reveal his true nature. About halfway through Niji and Naruto's fight, Hinata felt several dire presences dotting the arena. She eased her Byakugan for only a moment, and immediately saw quite a number of foreign shinobi. There's too many here, she mused, knowing that there was no way in hell the Hokage would authorize this many non-native ninjas. And they're trying to conceal themselves. This isn't good. She decided that preparation for this soon-to-be invasion took precedence over the match before her, and feigned her old injuries left over from her elder cousin. Of course, this attracted Kibba's attention as well as one of the hidden hostiles. The Anbu impostor healed the Hyuga, unaware that her internal wounds had only been induced mere seconds before he attended to them, and then rendered her unconscious along with the Inuzuka. Naturally, Hinata's skills were superior to this level of trickery and she simply lied still, while the intruder walked away. When the sounds of real warfare began ringing in her ears, she scurried away in the confusion, easily fooling every combating ninja along the way due to their preoccupied state. She silently slipped down alleyways and dark narrow corridors until she eventually came upon the abandoned warehouse standing over her secret lab. She descended into the chamber, changed into her alter ego's outfit, then entered the adjacent hive of tunnels to attempt thwarting what she now knew was some kind of advanced reconnaissance force sent by Orochimaru. Her bright mind understood that the strangers dwelling within the dim caverns were a huge threat regardless of village affiliation, and only she and Curse were aware of how bad things could get if they were left unchecked on this day in particular. Advancing slower than usual, careful to conceal her presence as best she could, she patched the receiver in her ear into the radio in her private room. Shiori and Ichiro were standing by, keen ears glued to the many audio monitors. As she approached the hub, she smelled smoke and charred flesh. "There's fighting down here too?" She wondered, flattening herself against the many shadows as she worked her way forward. The familiar light of the desired junction began to flood the passageway, and her pale bloodline eyes easily picked up everything with perfect clarity. She flinched when she noticed someone flash in front of the doorway, casting the briefest of shadows on the ground before her. Readying her stake launchers, she rushed to the entrance and peeked through to find a veritable war zone. Bodies were strewn and raked everywhere, obviously former devout followers of Orochimaru given their dull gray garments. Her superior vision also noticed quite a few living inhabitants in the never-ending shaft rooting through the bodies, picking them clean of weaponry, and killing off any survivors. These people belonged to the reconnaissance army. They had no standard ninja gear and dressed as they pleased. The Hyuga stiffened. I can't fight this many, she analyzed. I die before I could even aim. Wait, what are they doing? She paused and observed curiously when she noticed that the many enemies appeared quite rushed and performed bizarre tasks. Shouts and screams began to echo through the opposing exits, and bloodied shinobi rushed through, while their comrades stuffed bodies into the holes in an attempt to block them. She frowned behind her dull azure mask before stifling a gasp when a girl glanced right at her. Hurry, said girl Veld, paying no mind to silence. He's coming. Hurry. The female shinobi looked really familiar with that slick red hair and crimson eyes. Hinata backed into her tunnel with eyes focused on the teenager that noticed her when the situation began to unfold before her. The impromptu walls of gray and black corpses collapsed as more rogue sound ninjas tore them down from the other side, terrified at whatever they thought was behind them. They faced immediate berating from their fair-weather comrades, and a few were struck down by the more ill-tempered of the bunch as they continued to charge until they stuck to the opposite wall. What in the hell is going on? The Hyuga was desperately confused. Who's coming? Orochimaru. Her answer arrived soon enough in the form of a man with the most tangled mess of hair she had even witnessed. The stranger wore a long cloak with a hood and swung a long rusty sword with the widest smile and the loudest laughter she had even seen or heard as he slashed through everything in his way without distinction. This newcomer was the former sound ninja's enemy, apparently. The moment he came into sight, the air filled with airborne steel as projectiles of every sort flew at him and hit nothing. Many of the colorful enemies charged him with brutal weapons drawn, stabbing, piercing, slicing, and bashing him to no avail whatsoever. With insane joviality, the single assassin drove his oxidized blade through every opponent with wild, uncontrolled slashes. Silence was stupefied. How is he not dying? He can be another Jashin follower. He's being sliced in half, but not falling apart. Bloody minutes rolled by, and the surge of former sound shinobi lessened only a little. It was a common ploy, allow the weaker fighters to force the enemy to expend energy disposing of them, then throw in the stronger warriors to finish the opponent off. A stocky man spun gracefully around the mad-hooded enemy, bound him with several heavy chains, and pulled back, holding the snickering warrior in place as he tried to push in the opposite direction. The sole assassin was then met with a huge sword stabbing through his deteriorating cloak, but his body suddenly moved through the wrecked clothing as well as the chains, and he grasped his new assailant by the throat, lifting him off the ground before burying his rusted blade through the heart. What was that? Hinata observed, too jumpy to panic. Her altered vision noticed something very wrong with the single attacker's body the moment he bypassed the chains. It's like he turned into a shadow now that the stranger was free of the confines of the heavy cloak. Silence understood why he couldn't be killed. Every strike, every swing delivered passed through a sudden darkness that appeared in his body for only a moment. The Hyuga's bright mind concocted a theory, and she glanced at the enemy's feet. He had no shadow. The light around him was dim, but it was still bright enough that it should have cast a shadow. That can be. She gazed at him for a moment later and came to a realization. He's bonded with his shadow. That's why nothing can hurt him. He turns into a shadow when he needs to. Panic began to set in her mind, and she turned to run. She couldn't win this. So far, dozens of experienced murderers and killers had fallen to the Shadow Man and his oxidized sword, and the many dozens remaining appeared to be faring no better. What could she do? This was the smart choice, escape and live to fight another day. She then noticed the teenage girl that saw her taking advantage of the mass confusion and retreating from the fight straight for her. Silence spun on her heel and aimed her stake launchers at the older female and prepared to fire until she saw a pair of raised and unarmed palms. Your silence, right? The girl asked in a rushed tone, her voice smooth yet raspy at the same time. She appeared in her mid-teens and wore a dull olive green uniform, complete with a sleeveless felt jacket and a pair of tattered slacks. Aren't you? Hinata merely glared at her. And what if I am? Help me get out of here? She demanded in a hushed whisper. She eyed her even more. No, she said flatly. God damn it. The crimson-haired teen hissed. I'm begging you. Please help me get past him. Garaza. A voice yelled out from the fray behind the young girls, attracting the former sound ninja's attention. "Where are you?" The individual addressing her never finished. His neck exploded in a shower of dark blood, and his head flew through the air. Shit. Garaza cursed, then turned to chase after Silence. If she could take out Commander Takemi, she thought as she ran, then it'd be a good idea to follow her. The fact that the defecting shinobi gave pursuit did not go unnoticed by the Hyuga, as she dodged and weaved to the best of her abilities within the maze of dim caverns. After a few minutes of full-fledged running, Silence was amazed that the slightly older girl was still able to keep track of her. Wait, she analyzed, an amusing idea popping into her head. If she's serious about wanting me to help, then she might make a useful ally. She halted in her randomized escape pattern and awaited the older female's arrival. Phew, Garaza panted as she approached the genius girl. My god. She doubled over, wheezing like there was no tomorrow. You're fast, she coughed between mighty inhales. Thanks. Hinata accepted the compliment, but couldn't believe such a short run winded this unusual girl. Is she even a ninja? She shook that query from her mind and focused on the task at hand, deciphering the exhausted shinobi's motives. Why do you want me to help you get out of here? Simple. Her chest rose and fell with less intensity, now that her lungs had some air. I want to survive. Survive what? She shot an odd look at her. You saw him, that freak that's tearing us up. Who sent him? Orochimaru. Oh, hell no, she returned, her breathing almost back to normal frequencies. Orochimaru sent in all those Jonin bastards we're using for walls. You killed them, yeah? She winked and held her arm out in an exaggerated victorious gesture. They thought they could waltz in here and take charge. The Dumbus is all right. So then who is that shadow man? Garaza cocked a flaming crimson eyebrow. Shadow? Is that what he is? Yeah. The Hyuga actually had no idea, but best let this potential adversary think what she will. Do you know who sent him? Not a clue. Maybe look who I found. A disturbingly close voice shouted, prompting the females to spin around in surprised fright. It was the so-called shadow man, minus the hooded cloak. He was bound in a mess of dark torn clothing that somehow covered his body adequately, insane smile still prevalent on his features, as he raised his straight-rested blade. Run. Hinata shouted as she broke into a dead run. Where the hell did he come from? I didn't hear him at all. Wait up. Garaza yelled, her overall velocity decreasing as she ran out of breath again. Oh, for the love of Silence, muttered as she screeched to a halt and fired dual stakes at their pursuer. The steel bolts exploded in the man's face, showering him with boiling metal which passed through his suddenly shadowy form with no consequence. Get up, the intelligent girl demanded her impromptu charge, seeing that there was nothing she could really do against this bizarre foe. Ow. Ow. The crimson-haired girl flinched, grasped. What kind of ninja are you? Suck it up. She pulled the red-eyed girl to her feet and started running again, this time dragging the unfortunate shinobi with her. As before, the Hyuga dashed through the extensive hive of tunnels with her temporary ally in tow, ordering her to figuratively grow a pair along the entire trip. Her brow furrowed when she noticed that their enemy didn't seem all that concerned about their retreat and took things easy. He walked casually after them, while still sporting that impossibly wide grin. But what puzzled Hinata was that, despite her and Garaza's swiftness, the enemy never fell behind. It was strange, almost as if he were traveling at the same velocity without putting forth the necessary effort to do so. The pally girl rounded another corner and stopped, her Byakugan actively watching the opponent's movements. She couldn't believe what happened. Next, The Soul Warrior walked into a dark shadow cast on the wall and reappeared around the corner in front of them, cocking ahead when he noticed they were no longer ahead of his general position. He started to turn slowly when the blue-haired girl's quick nerves set in, and Shin Agaraza silenced her with a hand over the mouth and swung around the corner again into the hallway. They had just exited. Both girls held their breath, as if the slightest whisper would bring the entire hive system down on them. Silence's bloodline watched intently as the man glanced back and forth in a somewhat comical manner, then shrugged to himself with a prolonged chuckle before disappearing into the shadows again. The girls didn't dare utter a word for the next few long minutes, before finally breathing simultaneous sighs of relief. Hyuga hit the ground hard as she took a seat, but she paid no mind to the mild shock. She was elated that somehow they had escaped, at least for the moment. Heh, she chuckled, who knew he'd be so dumb? Yeah, the crimson-eyed girl agreed as she sat cross-legged across from her prodigy savior, sucking in air to refill her lungs. So what's your story? Garaza took a moment to collect herself before answering. She looked rather tomboyish with her out-of-place clothes, but her actions didn't really match that assumption. My name is Garaza Nashin of the Nashin bloodline. Now her interest was piqued. Yeah, she nodded. I got myself transferred here a few weeks ago to look for a distant cousin of mine. Anyone I know? Oh, yeah. Her eyes displayed playful resentment, but not a great deal of it. You and Curse killed him too. Name was Giza. Oh, sorry about that, she lied. How could she apologize for disposing of an enemy that would have killed her otherwise? Don't lie, the crimson-eyed teen replied, brushing it off as if Hinata had spilled milk on the floor, rather than eliminated a relative. I know you don't seem too upset about it. Nah, not really. Us nations aren't really friendly towards each other. The Hyuga recalled a comment phrased by the long-dead blood user, and her eyes narrowed. Giza said that his entire family was dead, killed off by Orochimaru. Giza got transferred here years ago, she explained nonchalantly, back when Orochimaru really was trying to figure out how to dissect most of us. Couple years ago, that old snake bastard finally figured out he couldn't and gave up. Guess Giza just assumed we were all dead. Hold on. Silence, held her open palms out to put the conversation on pause. Why now? Why do you want my help now? We're still enemies. What's changed? The Nation sighed and ran a rough hand through her slick blazing hair. A bunch of us didn't have any allegiances either way to begin with. We only got sent here because Orochimaru feared our combined abilities. Yeah, what kind of ninja are you? Suck it up. She pulled the red-eyed girl to her feet and started running again, this time dragging the unfortunate shinobi with her. As before, the Hyuga dashed through the extensive hive of tunnels with her temporary ally in tow, ordering her to figuratively grow a pair along the entire trip. Her brow furrowed when she noticed that their enemy didn't seem all that concerned about their retreat and took things easy. He walked casually after them, while still sporting that impossibly wide grin. But what puzzled Hinata was that, despite her and Garaza's swiftness, the enemy never fell behind. It was strange, almost as if he were traveling at the same velocity without putting forth the necessary effort to do so. The pally girl rounded another corner and stopped, her Byakugan actively watching the opponent's movements. She couldn't believe what happened. Next, The Soul Warrior walked into a dark shadow cast on the wall and reappeared around the corner in front of them, cocking a head when he noticed they were no longer ahead of his general position. He started to turn slowly when the blue-haired girl's quick nerves set in, and Shin Agaraza silenced her with a hand over the mouth and swung around the corner again into the hallway. They had just exited. Both girls held their breath, as if the slightest whisper would bring the entire hive system down on them. Silence's bloodline watched intently as the man glanced back and forth in a somewhat comical manner, then shrugged to himself with a prolonged chuckle before disappearing into the shadows again. The girls didn't dare utter a word for the next few long minutes, before finally breathing simultaneous sighs of relief. The Hyuga hit the ground hard as she took a seat, but she paid no mind to the mild shock. She was elated that somehow they had escaped, at least for the moment. Heh, she chuckled, who knew he'd be so dumb? Yeah, the crimson-eyed girl agreed as she sat cross-legged across from her prodigy savior, sucking in air to refill her lungs. So what's your story? Garaza took a moment to collect herself before answering. She looked rather tomboyish with her out-of-place clothes, but her actions didn't really match that assumption. My name is Garaza Nation of the Nation bloodline? Now her interest was piqued. Yeah, she nodded. I got myself transferred here a few weeks ago to look for a distant cousin of mine. Anyone I know? Oh, yeah, her eyes displayed playful resentment, but not a great deal of it. You and Curse killed him too. Name was Giza. Oh, sorry about that, she lied. How could she apologize for disposing of an enemy that would have killed her otherwise? Don't lie, the crimson-eyed teen replied, brushing it off as if Hinata had spilled milk on the floor, rather than eliminated a relative. I know you don't seem too upset about it. Nah, not really. Us nations aren't really friendly towards each other. The Hyuga recalled a comment phrased by the long-dead blood user, and her eyes narrowed. Giza said that his entire family was dead, killed off by Orochimaru. Giza got transferred here years ago, she explained nonchalantly, back when Orochimaru really was trying to figure out how to dissect most of us. Couple years ago, that old snake bastard finally figured out he couldn't and gave up. Guess Giza just assumed we were all dead. Hold on. Silence, held her open palms out to put the conversation on pause. Why now? Why do you want my help now? We're still enemies. What's changed? The Nation sighed and ran a rough hand through her slick blazing hair. A bunch of us didn't have any allegiances either way to begin with. We only got sent here because Orochimaru feared our combined abilities. Yeah, all you guys have a sob story. So why? What's left of my family? Hinata nodded in acknowledgement, and a few moments passed before she decided to break the awkward silence. Will you get so winded? She changed the topic. You're a ninja, aren't you? Nope, she shook her head. I'm an intel officer. I don't fight. Yeah, that's serving you well right now. Hey, she responded to the jibe. I got some skills. They're just not fighting skills. What do you do? She tapped an ear. I listen. You have super hearing, the Hyuga stated flatly. No. I use this. She pulled several wide coils of wires from the many packs strapped around her belt, string them up and listen to the vibrations. No offense, but that doesn't seem real useful all on its own. Don't insult me. I got the best ears of my squad. Yeah, her mood darkened somewhat, but she didn't appear too concerned about it. Rise and Shiro are dead. I saw them die, but Karen escaped. I think Karen? The name sounded familiar. Something about being a loyalist. She's got the best tracking skills. She can sense certain kinsa chakra from miles away. Course, she can't hear a conversation from 4 kilometers away loud and clear, but she's got her uses. I see. Another uneasy silence passed. So what's in it for me? If I get you out of here, well, she scratched her cheek, a clear sign of some form of embarrassment. I already know the way out of here. I just need someone to help me get there. Those great skills of yours helping you out there. Hinata couldn't help it. She was having fun mocking the uneasy ally. Stuff it. Seriously though, what's in it for me? What do I get out of this? The itching continued. I know where a bunch of Orochimaru's bases are as well as their garrisons. Whoa, she mused, that's good stuff. I might want to take her up on this offer, provided she doesn't try to kill me first chance she gets. Smirking behind her visage, she held a film-covered palm out. Sounds good. Nice to be working with you. Araza returned a smile similar to that of a certain hyperactive blonde as she accepted the gesture and shook the genius girl's hand. Right back at you. Sten emerged from the shadows near the shaft filled with sound effectors to finish the job assigned him. He chuckled to himself, tightening his grip on his accursed weapon. I lost one of them, no big deal. There are plenty left here. He advanced into the massive blood-stained vertical tunnel and once again began slicing and dicing his way as he wildly swung his aged sword. He reveled in the moment. He lived for this. Of course, his sword helped him enjoy times such as these, as few and far between as they were, but a nagging voice in the back of his mind reminded him of the drawbacks. His sword evoked utter happiness when he grasped its hilt, but those emotions were his own. Wielding the ancient weapon merely condensed these feelings of ecstasy he could experience throughout his life into the sole moments he fought with the sword. It provided him joy in its use, but robbed him of those sentiments whenever it was sheathed. The curse of his blade would also drain his life to continue fighting until the end of eternity should he be mortally wounded, but thankfully his power over the realm of shadows prevented that. But if his secret were to ever unravel, his bane of a sword would be the death of him. However, all that was moot at the moment. This is great, he shouted internally, laughing as hard as his lungs could manage as he impaled indeterminate amounts of targets. This is what I call living. Hinata and Garaza ran hell-bent down the twists and turns of the dim corridors. They had taken a detour around the hub, and what detour it was, holy crap, the blue-haired genius proclaimed mentally, this added a half hour. That Shadow Man might be done by the time we get to the other side. The Nashan panted hard as her lack of physical training took its toll, but she was a trooper. She never once complained or requested a break, she merely kept at it with feigned endurance. She had been slowed down a bit by the fact that Silence didn't intend to leave her time to reconsider her reward upon freedom. The undercover prodigy had handed her a map of the outlying countries and forced her to locate and mark Orochimaru's bases and their accompanying inhabitants. But it wasn't so bad after all. This is what her occupation entailed, multitasking. You almost done back there? The Hyuga inquired, keeping her active Byakugan glued to every visible surface. The shadows were everywhere, about halfway, the bloodline user replied in a detached tone. She was surprisingly serious when working. Should be done when we reach the home stretch. The female prodigy said nothing in return. Was there any need? She merely kept her pale eyes locked onto everything at once as she sailed through the poor illumination. I really hope that guy doesn't show up, she whined. I have no idea how to fight him. The stressful minutes ticked by endlessly, and time passed slowly as the duo carefully made their way to the singular cavern that apparently led well out of Konoha. After a while, the boredom started getting to Hinata and she glanced back to find Garaza still hammering away at running and marking the map. So how did your family wind up with Orochimaru, huh? This caught the Nashan off guard. Someone actually wondered about that? Well, we didn't really have a choice, she returned with a matter-of-fact tone, gaze never breaking from the map in her hands. You said he almost killed off your entire family, the prodigy continued. Why didn't you try to escape when he quit? He kept us around by force. By force? How's that possible? The crimson-haired girl cocked an eyebrow. Prisons and guards? How else do you keep someone around who don't want to be there? What's your bloodline do? She inquired even though she recalled it quite clearly. What if this girl was lying and wasn't who she claimed to be? You saw it. We can melt shit with our blood. It dissolves everything except our bodies. Right, that's what I mean. How could it keep you locked up if you could destroy your confines? There was a pause before Garaza answered. That doesn't mean he still couldn't kill us. When your bloodline's facing extinction, you do all kinds of stuff. Us nations might not get along, but we still got our pride. It would suck if we all died out. Silence considered this. It was a valid notion. This caught her off guard. The crimson-eyed girl didn't really seem all that motivated to accomplish anything outside of survival. Why, the Nation family's divided into two classes, kinda like the Hyugas, but not in the same way. Hinata froze for the briefest of moments upon hearing her surname. How so? Hyugas are a family with a sub-family. Nations have a fighting class and a thinking class. The Hyuga frowned at this. Sounds counterproductive. Why that setup? Hey, it worked just fine until Orochimaru came around. The fighters concentrate on just fighting, and the smart guys deal with politics and anything that requires subtlety. So what happened? That snake bastard came along and convinced the smart ones to join him, then killed them off, which left the fighters confused. They started a revolt, and he kept killing them until a few years ago. Let me guess, you belong to the thinking class. Yeah, she glanced up, a bright smile adorning her rough features. I'm the newest generation of smart ones. There are only a few of us around these days. I came searching for Giza, because apparently he's one of the better fighters we got. I see. Plus, I figured it'd have been a good idea to make him teach me how to fight. It's a new age, after all. Hold it, Hinata abruptly interrupted, holding a film-covered hand out to quiet the red-eyed teen. She sensed something. It didn't appear to be a moving shadow, but she felt it nonetheless. Her breathing slowed as she took in her surroundings, and she frowned when Garaza carefully placed the map on the ground, then followed with an ear and open palms on the cool stone floor. The blood user closed her eyes and stopped inhaling for several seconds at a time. This isn't as good as my wires, she commented in a voice a hair above a silent whisper. I can hear the fighting in Sector B0, the Shadow Man's still there. If there's anyone around us, they're keeping very still. An eternity of minutes passed and her head snapped up with wide eyes. He stepped and disappeared. Shock melted into puzzlement and the Nation placed her ear back down to the ground to confirm her conclusion. Yeah, whoever was there is gone. Was it the shadow guy? Silence asked in a similar hushed whisper. No, she shook her head as she stood. I could hear him killing everyone in Sector B0 the whole time. There's no one ahead of us now. The Hyuga nodded and gazed forward. I should have seen something with my Byakugan, but I didn't. What kind of trick is this? With renewed hesitation and caution, the female duo crept forward with increasing swiftness until they were making good time again. A chamber shrouded in complete darkness came to life as a brilliant roiling light shone in its center, and a man dressed in a frayed blue business suit stepped out. Upon his arrival, the flexing colors bent inwards and disappeared while sickly phosphorescent lamps flickered overhead to greet him. The strange thin man adjusted his tie, then proceeded forward across the green and white tiled floor to a screen that buzzed on to reveal a static channel. Interesting, he commented to the camera peering down from the malfunctioning monitor. It seems that the Hyuga felt the distortion. He smirked to himself, and her friend seemed quite observant as well. He recalled the Nation picking up his near silent footstep as he walked into the bending portal to extract himself from that dim location. Least he have I see, a voice sounded from the static screen. I thank you for your opinion on the matter. It is quite informative in our decision-making process. Please keep up the good work. The monitor snapped off, and the mysterious businessman waltzed over to a set of dirty double doors and eased them open, attracting the attention of the sole inhabitant of the dingy room that should have been kept sterile. Doctor, the tall pale man addressed the apathetic man of medicine. Management has sent me to assist you in procuring raw materials. Is there anything you require at the moment, huh? The apathetic man turned with drooping eyes before speaking through his bloodied surgeon mask. Nah, nothing special. Just keep bringing me those spare parts I ask for. The businessman frowned. I do not recall you filling out the proper forms requesting low-grade materials. Come on, he whined as he turned back to the dissected body before him. You know that paperwork's a wasted time. The boss wants me to give him good stuff, and that's what I'm gonna do. He pursed his lips and shook his head slowly. Very well. I shall return in a moment. With that, he disappeared back into the morgue's large storage room from which he arrived. Yeah, the unconcerned surgeon mused as he dug back into the corpse on the table in search of more spare parts. Whatever. Hinata and Garaza stood at the end of an incredibly long passageway that glimmered with a dot of natural light at the opposite end. This was the way out of Konoha, a secret passageway that was surprisingly unprotected. Never knew that was there, Silence commented, peering down the vast hall. Is Konoha really that vulnerable? The Nation laughed. Yeah, you guys got a back door without actually having a door? "Man, whoever built this place was an idiot, shut it," the Hyuga warned. It wasn't like her new ally was insulting her, but it was still her village. "Anyway, that map, here you go." She handed over the folded document with a smart grin. "I dunno all of Orochimaru's hideouts, but I know a lot of them." The blue-haired girl glanced at the many marks with her Byakugan, then held out a film-covered hand. "Pleasure doing business with you. Same with you." Guraz accepted the gesture with gusto. A moment later, she started running down the open exit, then suddenly halted and turned to Hinata. She snapped off a casual salute and winked with a smile. "Thanks a bunch. The Nashin family will remember your benevolence." With that, she spun around and charged hellbound for the speck of light that would ensure her freedom. Silence watched her retreating back with a grin behind her dull azure mask. "Well, that was kinda fun, but enough of that. I gotta get back to the stadium. I think Konoha's retaliation plan should be kicking in about now." She quickly navigated her way through the war-torn catacombs and eventually resumed playing possum next to Kiba and Akamaru in the arena where the battle for the village began. The next day was a sullen one compared to the normally cheery summer mornings that the city enjoyed. The sun was hidden behind billowing dark clouds that threatened rain at a moment's notice. Debris still littered the streets and rooftops, along with a handful of corpses that had yet to be collected, and grief stifled the air as the village mourned those lost. Naruto cried honest tears at the Hokage's funeral. The old man was one of the few people he held in high regard, and he would be missed greatly by the blonde. Unbeknownst to the concealed genius, Hinata also watched on with sadness pulling in her pale eyes. She had seen the aged sage the day before the invasion and tried to warn him of the looming dangers underneath, but her calculations utterly failed this time. Feeling a twinge of personal guilt at Saratobi's death, she allowed a few tears of her own to fall as well. Nature, of course, continued on as it always does. Soon after the ninja leader's funeral, the sun's rays pierced the weeping clouds, and the brilliant summer days quickly resumed their course with chirping birds and moistened breezes. The misery of those killed in the attack was still there, but the uplifting mood helped things along. That evening, the full moon cast its eerie illumination upon the Hokage's fresh grave, baptizing it in pale light that commanded peace and serenity. All was quiet around the tombstone. Kerr stood before the old man's final resting place, his crimson mask leveled upon the name inscribed on the cold stone. The Uzumaki felt that he at least owed Saratobi that much, a final farewell from his true self. He felt a presence behind him and checked the instinct to flinch. He recognized the other visitor. Silence stepped up next to him, her dull azure mask soaking up the moonlight like salt in shallow water. The Hyuga was distraught that her efforts to save the shinobi leader while keeping her identity a secret could have led to Saratobi's death. If she had not administered her newest memory-inhibiting drug and he remembered her warning, would he have been alive today? Her young mind didn't know the answer, and it never would. Konoha duo stood in statuesque silence as they gazed upon the grave for several minutes. Naruto nudged his hand over to Hinata's and, with an accepted gesture, clasped onto it and squeezed. He had no idea what she had gone through during the invasion, but he was glad she was all right. Little did he know, the pale-eyed girl felt the exact same way about him. After an indeterminate amount of time passed, they nodded simultaneously, unlocked their intertwined fingers, and parted without a word. Curse and silence had uttered their inaudible farewells to Saratobi, third Hokage of Konoha. The days after the village's invasion and its late Hokage's funeral, Naruto spent less time behind his idiotic visage. There was simply no reason for him to keep up the appearance of a moron, while everyone was still reeling from the massive amount of damage dealt in the attack. He had the time to spend it as he pleased. He chose to pass the hours attempting to alleviate Shia's suffering. Ever since the disturbed girl's brother had been killed in battle, the blonde had made every attempt to reach out to her, albeit at an excruciatingly slow pace. If he had been working on a technique or seal, he would have changed his approach long ago, due to the insane amount of time it consumed, but this operation could be performed no other way, and he knew it. Like they say, time heals all wounds. The brown-haired girl had already reached the point where she no longer shied away from his mere presence. He could approach her now without her freaking out. But that was about it. She was still mostly unresponsive to any gesture, and didn't seem to ever move from her huddled position against the wall. I've gotta get her to turn around, he knew as he donned his crimson mask in preparation to enter her cell, or she'll die of loneliness sooner than anything else. With that, he unlocked the heavy steel door and swung it open. She didn't move or look up, in actions that were slowly becoming dominant in her downbeat personality. The blonde said nothing as he approached the bars and took them apart. He had gotten into the habit of leaving the impromptu door loose and easy to deconstruct, with the purpose of easy access for these visits. The Uzumaki strode over to the unresponsive girl and took a seat next to her, easing a small tray of steaming food before her feet. His azure eyes noticed that her previous meals were only half-eaten, and crumbs littered her dirty mouth. Hey, Shia, he said softly, hoping that maybe today she would speak. When no reply came back, he put his arm around her shoulder and started rubbing slowly. A few tense moments passed and he commented, "You really should eat something. You're starting to get thin. Why?" She cut him off, something that was rare even in her distraught state. "Why you killed my brother, then do all these nice things, ff for me." Why Naruto paused to collect his words. "Because I know what loneliness can do to you. You lose all hope of living, and soon start to hate everything and everyone, even those who might care about you. Except that you killed someone who did. I told my brother and he loved me." T2 cursed, tightened his soft grip on her arm, and didn't try to defend himself. "Yeah, I know," he said after a while. "And there's nothing I can ever do to make up for that." He peered into her eyes and she glanced back at the oral contact. "But please believe me when I say I'm sorry. I really am." Shia's eyes shifted, signifying that I had something to say. "If you knew Duel was my brother," she started with a subdued harshness, "would you have still killed him?" He struggled with that one. "I don't know." He broke the gaze and looked away in minor shame. "I really don't know." The second personality neither had a comeback nor seemed to want to tear his throat out, so she receded, and Shia's brown eyes flexed into her dominant personality. She didn't have anything to say either, and her head sunk back between her knees. A few awkward seconds passed, and Naruto took a deep whiff of the air, his nose cringing at the smell. "That's right, she hasn't washed up since I captured her. Geez, that was weeks ago. She's not eating right either. She could get sick at this rate." An idea struck him, and he abruptly released the girl and headed for the prison door, without bothering to lock it behind him. "Be right back," he called before he disappeared into the adjacent room, then from the strange chamber altogether. This struck the disturbed girl as odd. He's never left the door wide open before, she analyzed, her perpetual misery overpowering her surprise. "Could he? I don't think." "Screw what you think," the aggressive second personality shouted in her mind. "You're too damn emotional. First you think he's nice, then mean, then nice again. You can't even make up your own damn mind." "PP please," her stutter kicked in within her own subconscious, evidence that IU was breaking her. Again, "Shut up. What the hell do you know? I'm around because you need me. Your weak-ass mind created me to make all the important decisions, and now, in the worst mess you've ever been in your whole damn life, you wanna rebel against me. That's not. I don't give a damn if you wanna die, but I sure as hell don't. I want to live too, damn it." Shia's brown eyes welled up, and the waterworks were about to start again, when the salty moisture suddenly retreated upon a loud thump emanating from the adjacent room. Peering up, the girl found Curse waltzing into her cell with purpose in his steps. He began unlocking her remaining shackles, shocking her speechless. "All right, turn around," he commanded. The disturbed girl was too beaten down to resist and acted with systematic obedience. Naruto slipped a fell cloth over her eyes and chuckled as she jumped at the action. "Relax," he assured her, "I'm not gonna do anything to you." Mentally, IU screamed at the dominant personality at how screwed they were. The secondary self was positive that their mutual death and/or rape was at hand, and she didn't spare her fear-laced anger within the shy girl's troubled brain. Shia's mind raced with thoughts of every possibility, both realistic and absolutely ridiculous, in an attempt to prepare herself for what was to come. Her muscles unconsciously tightened when she was strapped to something warm, and feelings of vertigo and claustrophobia washed over her following that. Every inch of her body trembled with nervousness when her feet touched the ground again, and the blindfold was flipped off to reveal a simple tiled room containing a bathtub filled with steaming hot water. Her head swiveled over to Curse, and her mouth imitated a fish out of water. "Wah wah wah, it's a bath," the blonde said with no small amount of amusement. "I don't know if you noticed, but Eureka, she stumbled over every consecutive word and its accompanying thought. This was too much for her traumatized brain to process at the moment. "I lined the room with trap seals and whatnot," he explained casually as he moved for the entrance, "so please don't try to break out. That would suck for all of us." He grasped the door handle and started to close the wooden barricade, when he leaned back in and stated, "Oh, towels over there with a change of clothes." He smiled. "Hope you don't mind hand-me-downs." "Not like I have any girl's clothes," he trailed off as the door clicked shut, and his back slumped against it. Shia could only blink at what just transpired. This was the last thing she expected from her captor, especially after Ayu's adamant accusations involving utmost brutality. Almost a minute passed before she moved a muscle. Naruto sat with his back to the closed entrance, his mirrored eyes keeping a sharp lookout over his apartment. The blinds were drawn, the doors and windows were locked, only the second presence in the room could tip off anyone that something was amiss, and the higher-up ninjas were too busy to worry about his less-than-savory digs. He grinned to himself. He had gotten a strong reaction out of the downcast girl. Of course, blindfolding someone then hauling them up a tight tunnel without informing them first was bound to surprise anybody. Maybe this will work out sooner than I thought. He heard water slushing behind the wooden door and wondered how long he'd have to sit there while she enjoyed the bath. A few minutes passed, an idea struck him. And enjoy it she did. About a half hour went by before she emerged from the steamy room with damp hair and old clothes that once belonged to the blonde. She bowed nervously, while stuttering out more words of thanks. Uzumaki merely laughed it off and mussed her wet brown hair that fell a little below the shoulders. Wow, he mused, didn't think she was this cute. Guess a little cleaning makes all the difference. He blindfolded her again for the descending return to his private chamber and, upon arrival, surprised her again with a plan for a new living setup that he figured she would enjoy. She listened to Naruto's plan that basically dictated her prison to be transformed into an actual room rather than a jail with wonder. Here was this stranger who had treated her humanely from the day he met her despite her shortcomings, but this person also killed the only remaining family she had. But while she could righteously blame him for that, Curse and Duel were enemies at the time, so death was a mutual thing for them. But Curse is so kind, the disturbed girl thought, confusion swimming in her head. She expected Aya to chime in with her usual negativity, but the second personality merely sat by, stewing over being incorrect in her unsavory assumptions in silence. The brown-haired girl's attention suddenly snapped back to Curse when he stopped talking and glanced at her. She let a weak smile distort her lips and said, Thank you, Curse, come on, he returned jovially, patting her still moist hair with a gentle hand. I'm sure you want a change of scenery. Let's get started. With that, the concealed prodigy spent the remainder of the evening with Shia tearing down her cell and slowly turning it into a chamber worthy of comfort. Unknowingly, the distraught girl's misery over her elder sibling's untimely death lessened little by little as the prison bars clattered to the ground and were replaced with cheap wooden floors. It never struck her that the undercover genius had conceived this entire plan as a form of therapy. Anko entered her home after a long day and flung herself on the couch. She was exhausted. The rebuilding of Konoha fell mostly on the shoulders of its civilian population, but mission requests were another matter. Those couldn't be refused or allocated elsewhere. Doing so would raise 1,000 red flags pointing out that Konoha, while still standing, was frightfully weak at the moment. So while shinobi work had not really changed in number, the ratio of missions per ninja had increased a great deal. She gazed around her dwelling with tired eyes. It was a small apartment, but it was cozy, a good place to call home. Her eyelids fluttered as her body demanded sleep, but she couldn't shake a certain stranger from her mind. Curse said Takemi and her crew was around, she mused, but I didn't see any of them. No one else did either. Those guys are impossible to miss. So what happened to them? Her lungs expanded as she took a deep breath, sighed, and then lurched forward to stand. A curious whim flittered through her mind, and she waltzed over to her table, backtracking as best she could, where Curse had made physical contact. Nothing here. She analyzed the wooden furniture, following the mysterious man's path to the window. No tracks, no nothing. Hello, what have we got here? Her eyes gazed down at a barely noticeable imprint in the cheap carpet below her window. The fibers were pressed down into two adjacent rectangles, evidence of the armored jet sandals Curse wore. Must have pushed down hard enough to lift himself up to the windowsill, she concluded as she followed the trial-out set opening. Noting that no further tracks were left behind, she took another deep breath and decided to take an easy stroll around the village before partaking in a well-deserved nap. Haven't been to the Hokage's grave yet. Hinata felt like she was about to lose her mind. Since the village was on high alert, notable persons such as nobility were to be watched closely to ensure their safety. She, being of the main Hyuga house and the daughter of its leader, fell under this category. Fighting the urge to disappear so she could work in her main hidden chamber, she knew that performing the necessary evading of guards would arouse suspicion and possibly blow her cover. So now I gotta sit in this boring-ass mansion. She casually strolled through one of the many gardens littering the extensive compound, noting the locations of the guards who believed themselves well hidden. Why do they think I'm such a weak little girl who needs protecting? She raged inwardly. Not even father thinks that. Oh well, can't do anything about it now. She approached one of the shallow ponds and gazed at the exotic fish slipping through the clean water without effort, pale eyes glazing over as she entered what she had dubbed trance model. As she stared at the aquatic life forms, her sharp mind pondered their wondrous environment. Water, she mused, any object can move easily through still water, but if it's moving fast enough then nothing can resist it. Kindled like an unbreakable wall, this train of thought permeated the many layers of her brain, and an idea for a technique revolving around this liquid substance began to surface in her mental machinations. As the proper manipulations worked themselves out in her mind, there was this noise, this annoying sound, that got louder and louder every time. "What are you doing?" the younger sibling asked with a mixture of confusion and frustration. "I said your name several times but you didn't answer." I'm sorry, she stammered, mentally freaking out over her false appearance's inconsistency. "Damn it, I gotta end this bad habit of mine. It's gonna reveal me before too long." She gulped, assuming her shy persona. I guess just got lost in my own little W world." Hanabi arched an eyebrow. This wasn't the first time she caught her older sister in such an unresponsive state, but it was odd nonetheless. "Cousin Niji is looking for you." "Why?" She trembled, faking fear towards the prick. Why would that ass be looking for me? Settle a score or something?" "I don't know, something about an apology. Oh, okay, thank you." The elder Hyuga bowed meekly, then scampered off in search of her newly reformed cousin. The younger sibling cocked a young head at her strange sister's retreating form. "She's so weird, was she like this when I was younger?" "I sure don't remember." While most of Konoha worked at repairing the village, Jiraiya slaved away at one of his most time-consuming duties, peeping. He sat atop a building with an excellent strategic view of the women's hot springs several blocks away, trusty telescope in hand. So far, he was having a ball today, plenty of lovely ladies to go around. But his fun was cut short when Amura and Kaharu interrupted him to offer the title of fifth Hokage to the old lech. Naturally, Jiraiya refused the request and dodged their flawless logic by meeting them halfway. They wanted a Sannin, so he promised them a Sannin, just not him. At the end of his fantastic bartering, he recalled a certain blonde idiot that had caught his eye, and stated that Naruto would be tagging along in the search for the village's next leader. Of course the elders were mortified at this suggestion, not because they were biased assholes, but due to the possibility that the Uzumaki could be captured, and his inherent power used as fuel for a war against the ailing city. The Frogmaster assured them that nothing would go wrong, and went on his way in search of his new charge. "He's definitely an unusual kid," he mused as he got wind of the boys' usual hangouts, "a village idiot that mastered the shadow clone technique in one night, and summoned Gamabunta the first time he actually summoned a toad. I can't accept that he's as stupid as people make him out to be." His experienced mind began to think up some kind of test he could administer to gauge the undercover genius's potential. It couldn't be anything simple, because that would be self-defeating. While holding Naruto's interest, the boy was viciously stubborn when it came to things he deemed a waste of time. "I got it," he exclaimed inwardly. "If that old saying like father, like son holds any meaning, then this'll be perfect for him." After crossing all locations save Ichiraku's ramen off his list, he continued on towards said establishment. He would collect the blonde, leave Konoha with him and tow to search for Tsunade, and see how quickly the Uzumaki could grasp the Rasengan. While they were at it, Naruto was ecstatic. He got to go on a trip. And with one of the legendary Sannin no less. In all honesty, he really was excited. As prideful as he was about his secret abilities, he could at least admit that he had a long way to go. Hokages were purported to know at least 1,000 ninja techniques or possess unique blood limits, neither of which he could boast. Furthermore, he was young and lacked experience along with its accompanying wisdom. Perhaps Jiraiya would impart some of his sagely advice to him between peeping sessions. He had rushed home in an exaggerated frenzy to pack, but when he arrived at his rundown abode he didn't prepare the luggage himself. Instead, he created a handful of clones and, to mess with the Toadmaster a little, ordered them to pack everything nailed down while he wrapped up some business as his copies obeyed. He nabbed an armful of instant ramen and a pot, then slid down the ladder within his trap-lot vertical passage, arriving at his personal chamber with a solid thump. He could hear slow movement in the recently converted prison, and quickly donned his mask as the massive metal door creaked open, revealing a semi-curious Shia in a familiar blinding orange jumpsuit and shorts. Hey, the Uzumaki held up an open palm and smiled, attempting to downplay his unchanged clothes and a few beads of nervous sweat. He hadn't had time to switch. "See, curse," she stuttered, a slight improvement from her previous state, where she wouldn't even talk at all. Apparently Naruto's brilliant idea of using work as a sort of therapy worked as well as he'd hoped. Why you wearing that, huh?" He tried to act surprised, knowing he looked like a fool. "Oh, that. I don't have time to change. I'm in a rush." Tossing the pot and cups of instant ramen to the floor, he rushed over to a locker, flung it open, and removed a standard scroll from the top rack. He glanced at the side to confirm this was the one he desired, nodded satisfactorily, and then stored it in the partially invisible tattoos on the back of his left arm. This particular storage document contained nothing more than a change of his alter ego's clothing. He knew there would be a day he needed this thing. WW, what's going on? She stated, totally lost on why Curse was in such a hurry. He stopped and stared her down with mirrored eyes and a kind smile. I'm going on a trip. I'm not sure how long it'll be, so here's a little extra food. You remember where the food bin is down here? She nodded shyly, still hiding a little behind the huge steel door. Yeah, help yourself to the whole thing. Should be enough to eat like royalty for a month. The disturbed girl gave no response other than her brown eyes glazing over. Curse was leaving for a while? How long? Why am I concerned about this? She wondered. You okay? Naruto asked, removing himself from the ladder and strolling over to her. He noticed her snap out of her internal revelry and chuckled a little when she shied an inch further behind the door at his sudden appearance. Relax, he stated, mussing her hair and grinning at her reaction. It won't be permanent. I'll be back soon enough. Oh, okay. She seemed tentative for some reason. An awkward moment passed as the two gazed at each other with blank eyes. Well, I gotta go, the blonde exclaimed, feeling his clones popping out of existence. She said nothing as she observed her benevolent captor scale out of sight into the trap lot and passage. A few minutes went by, and she could no longer feel his presence, though she had never been much of a tracker like Karen. She frowned a little upon feeling a tug at the back of her mind. I had something to say, but it felt like she was hesitating. This isn't like you, she mentally directed at the second personality. Is something the matter? Despite her curiosity, she still feared the aggressive side of herself. The alternate ego had the miraculous ability to dredge up bad memories. No matter the situation, we should leave, Aya commented flatly with resigned harshness in her tone. Now she knew something was up. Her secondary self was authoritative. Every statement was a command, not a suggestion. Why Curse is leaving for a while? Her voice was calm and deliberate, a far cry from its usual fiery shrewdness. We should escape while we have the chance. Where should we go? Ensuing silence answered before Aya. Anywhere but here. It's dangerous here. Back to Commander Takemi? I don't think Takemi's around anymore. Why else are we not being held prisoner? We're not. We can leave. Shut up, the alter ego retorted, instantly realizing her error, but attempting to justify her mistaken point. Prisoners live in cages and dungeons. Last time I checked, we were living in a decent room with access to food and a shower. That's a good point. She had forgotten about Curse tapping into a water main to build a crude shower for her. But we can't leave. We already tried to go up that ladder and barely avoided the first trap. We couldn't possibly make it all the way up, then make another way, Aya demanded nonchalantly. There's always another way. Look, he left all these weapons behind. She immediately began systematically obeying her second self by pondering how to use the available resources around them. After all, that was her specialty. But after a few seconds she wondered why she would want to escape. Her brain racked itself for a plausible answer, but her young mind couldn't come up with a definitive reason. Despite her skill set and split personality, she was still a highly impressionable 9-year-old girl. Sure, Curse had captured her and put her through the routines of an average prisoner, but he never tortured or purposefully tried to harm her. He had unknowingly killed her brother, while they were enemies whose only an alternative to survival was death, but he had been there for her to help her through duels passing. While she stewed in aimless misery, he did his best to pull her from it and give her something worth living for, all while asking for nothing in return. And maybe, she muttered to herself, I can't put this behind me. As the dominant personality worked up her resolve, Alia sat in the back of her mind, grimacing at her own uncertain future. She's never defied me before. Anko waltzed over to the late Hokage's final resting place, yawning as she tried to keep sleepiness at bay for a while longer. She approached the grandiose graveside and stared at the name inscribed on the polished stone. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came. Her mind couldn't formulate anything worth mentioning. Well, I could talk about Curse, she knew, but if anyone hears me, I'm a dead woman. A few minutes passed, and the snake mistress eventually nodded, her silent prayers directed to the old man. She turned to continue back the way she came when she noticed a strange imprint on the ground at the edge of the plot. Wait a second. Her eyes widened. Is that what I think it is? She leaned forward and got a close look. Sure enough, her suspicions were confirmed. Those adjacent rectangles in the mud were identical to the ones in her carpet. Curse was here, she concluded, but whose footprints are these beside the known hidden genius's marks? Lied another set of indents within the moist dirt. They appeared to have soles, but the design was far different from the standard shinobi sandals. Almost looks like metal slabs were pushed in. The Mitarashi analyzed the strange footprints for a while longer, wondering if someone else had been with the strange crimson-masked man. Little did she know that she gazed upon Silence's imprints, further immersing herself in the mystery of the Konoha duo. As the weeks passed, so did the paranoia over the nobility's security. Hinata sighed in relief when the guards stopped following her around. Any more of that, and she felt that insanity would have been a welcome change. She had spent much of her unofficial captivity in her room writing poetry to attempt relaying her feelings to Naruto. Of course, that's what she wanted everyone to believe. In truth, she had been working out the kinks of several water-based techniques, so she could start field testing her theories when she could move about freely again. The poetry was merely a clever code she developed using prose and double meanings to stand for notes. Upon being relieved of her near-constant boredom, she swiftly made her way to her prized lab and proceeded to prepare a special chamber whose sole purpose revolved around practicing said experimental techniques. Since she wanted to work with water, next in the plan was to locate the ends of the massive underground tunnel adjacent to her private chamber and seal them off. Once again, the reassembled Hyugas proved invaluable as their modified bodies made blocking off the connecting points a breeze. After a week's work, the dim passage had been expertly isolated from the rest of the extensive hive and concealed by so many specialized seals and active techniques that no one without a complete map would ever know it had been there in the first place. The final phase of the new room was to flood it, an action that took no time at all. An hour after opening the underground tanks, the tunnel slushed up to the genius girl's knees with the cold liquid. Perfect. Hinata nerd to no one as she initiated her first technique, a modification of the already powerful water explosion dubbed the water implosion by the blue-haired prodigy. Yeah, so original. A small surge of water spattered around her feet with a slow buildup of chakra to ensure that it didn't become too large or go out of control. The cool liquid then began a steady spin upwards and, with careful deliberation so it wouldn't explode in Silence's face, shot forward in a horizontal tornado before impacting with the newly constructed wall many meters away, while engulfing several suspended kunai along the way. Upon contact, the Hyuga focused her natural energy on the miniature pillar. Silence let out a triumphant grin and released the successful technique. Man, what I wouldn't give to try this on a large scale. Oh well, I'll try it one more time then move on to the next time. Passed rather quickly for the blonde genius. He had been having so much fun on his journey with the perverted Sannin that, before he knew it, his mission had been accomplished. As Naruto headed back to Konoha with Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Shizune, his intelligent mind was abuzz with ideas and theories regarding the Rasengan technique. He had mastered the move in a relatively short time, at least in comparison to other ninjas. But the time required for him to truly unlock its potential had been agonizingly slow for him. If he had spent that time with Silence or Shia, he could have conquered the village 10 times over, or had a devout lover by now, not that he really minded, seeing as how all that hard work had paid off big time. He had it down perfectly, able to utilize only one hand for the move. However, the undercover genius noticed that Jiraiya kept a close eye on him when he wasn't out in the red light district or peering through a knothole at the local bathhouses. The old man seemed to be suspicious of something. So, in turn, the blonde made sure to limit himself publicly, so the old man would merely be impressed, but not so much that the Toad Master felt he was a waste of time and drop him as a pupil. But that was merely the highlight of his trip. He had seen so much more that made him feel like dancing with joy. To begin with, he had witnessed several high-end techniques performed by the trio of legendary ninjas. The one that caught his interest most was Jiraiya's Swamp of the Underworld, with the old perv's Toad Mouthbind and Needle Jizo as the runners-up. Sadly, he had only caught glimpses of the proper seals for each move, but he was confident that, with time, he could replicate the results. Even so, techniques were but a portion of his short yet eventful outing. He had encountered Sasuke's older brother Itachi and his partner Kisame, and then proceeded to watch the elder Uchiha open a can of imaginary woo pass on the conceited boy who had followed him. His brilliant mind didn't understand how the Sharingan was capable of screwing with someone's mind, but now that he had minimal knowledge of it, he could begin working on a counter. He almost felt pity for the younger bloodline user, almost. He's too arrogant to admit his own shortcomings. This'll be good for him in the long run. The Uzumaki also came across a new bit of information that would be impertinent to his future, the Akatsuki organization. They were after the fox seal within him for some reason, but whatever they had planned couldn't bode well for anyone. The blonde was grateful for Jiraiya bailing him out on this one, but he knew that he couldn't count on the legendary ninja forever. A time would come where he would have to fend for himself, and he needed to be prepared. Shouldn't be too bad. I'm a smart guy. Hell, I'll bet if Silence were with me, we'd wipe the floor with him. That thought caught him off guard despite coming out of his own head. He had never really thought of his counterpart as someone he could continuously count on. When he pondered over the matter further, he realized that at this point the female in question perfectly matched the definition of a friend. She was reliable, trustworthy, and seemed to enjoy his company on a certain level. Damn, he mused, could there be something more that I'm missing? As the blonde and his elite caravan strolled back into Konoha, a certain pale-eyed girl sneezed mightily. Phew, she mumbled at the relieving action, hope I'm not getting sick. That'd be bad. Weeks had rolled by since she initiated her technique research, and she had made tremendous progress with no small thanks to her new test chamber. In that time she had perfected the water implosion move and was near mastering 2 more water-based techniques that she designed from the ground up. At one point in time, she got the bright idea to integrate her electrical affinities to the cold liquid in order to produce a tremendous, if not fatal, boost in energy. Her research led to just that, an enormous increase in stopping power in her new water attacks. During the high point of her discoveries, she formulated another plan, one far more dangerous, but, if it worked flawlessly, would revolutionize her method of combat. She figured that, if she could somehow reproduce the burning liquid that was originally meant for the Jashin follower in a form that was mobile yet could cover ample ground, she could trap her future opponents in a sea of unstoppable acid. She cleared the first and greatest hurdle several days ago, changing the molecular layout of the liquid. Starting off with a gel variation, the process eventually morphed the stuff into a powdery form that, when mixed with water, could spread across an indefinite amount of space. Of course, the strength of the fluid was dependent on how much of its solid form was added, but such a thing consisted of mere numbers and ratios. Hinata figured that part out during a lunch break. Afterwards came the issue of being able to safely walk across the dangerous chemical. It only became acidic when bombarded with intense heat from an appropriate source, so the Hyuga theorized that an opposite charge would nullify its effects on the object that carried said opposing force. She built a handful of metal containers and performed quite a few experiments that eventually confirmed her idea. Setting out to build new footwear that could come into contact with the searing liquid, the blue-haired girl constructed numerous generators that were tiny. They could fit in the palm of her hand. Individually, they didn't produce much power, but connecting them in unison amplified their outputs exponentially. She constructed steel housings for these miniature power grids that appeared to be shin guards and built new metal boots that were capable of handling the charge without burning her feet off. The final challenge was the simplest by far, in theory. Putting it into practice would take insane effort of which Silence knew she was physically incapable. In order to force the fluid to reach its trademark burning state, it needed a charge, in this case, an exorbitant amount of power due to the widespread area of the inert acid. A generator of epic proportions would be needed, but if it wasn't mobile then the complicated technique would be worthless. There is a way, Hinata knew, but it's not right. I don't think I could do it in good conscience. This was a quandary for her. This amazing setup guaranteed her an advantage in battle, but in order to complete it, she would have to turn a blind eye to her morals. Kurenai was walking home after an impromptu date with Asuma. She ran into him on her way for some groceries, and the encounter turned into a night on the town, or at least as wild as she could get. Oh, how the approaching woman could put her to shame. Kurenai, Anko yelled out as she caught up. You got a minute? Certainly, the Yugi responded pleasantly, face twisting in surprised concern upon laying eyes on the Fishnet clan ninja. Are you okay? You look really rough. Yeah, I'm fine, she lied. The Mitarashi hadn't slept well ever since concluding that there was more than one hidden genius in town a few weeks ago, and it showed. Hey, you see anything weird lately? What? You know, anything out of the ordinary? Anyone acting strange? The crimson-eyed woman arched an eyebrow. Her too? Mulling over what to do, she decided that Anko was a friend, loyal and trustworthy. She leaned in and her smooth voice spoke in a whisper. Actually, I've got the same thing on my mind too. You do? What is it? Tell me. Her tone was hushed, but the lack of sleep inhibited her brain when it came to polite speech, not that she paid it any mind anyway. All right, keep this quiet. She lurched forward even more and directed her voice into the snake mistress's ear with an extended palm. My student, Hinata, has been acting strange for a while. I used to escort her as a chunin, so I thought I knew her habits, but she's been deviating from them ever since I became her instructor. Anko's brow furrowed. She was too tired to really get it without being told the whole story. Care to elaborate? Here, come on up. Kurenai invited her into her apartment.